Accidental Death by Peter Bailey. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Alex Deva. Accidental Death by Peter Bailey. The wind howled out of the northwest, blind with snow and barbed with ice crystals. All the way up the half-mile precipice it fingered and wrenched away at groaning ice slabs. It screamed over the top, whirled snow in a dervish dance around the hollow there, piled snow into the long furrow, plowed ruler straight through streamlined hummocks of snow. The sun glinted on black rock glazed by ice, chasms and ridges and bridges of ice. It lit the snow slope to a frozen glare, penciled black shadow down the long furrow, and flashed at the furrow's end on a thing of metal and plastics, an artifact thrown down in the dead wilderness. Nothing grew, nothing flew, nothing walked, nothing talked. But the thing in the hollow was stirring in stiff jerks, like a snake with its back broken, or a clockwork toy running down. When the movement stopped, there was a click, and a strange sound began. Thin, scratchy, inaudible more than a yard away, wary but still cocky, there leaked from the shape in the hollow the sound of a human voice. "I have tried my hands and arms, and they seem to work," it began. "I've wiggled my toes with entire success. It's well on the cards that I'm all in one piece and not broken up at all, though I don't see how it could happen. Right now I don't feel like struggling up and finding out. I'm fine where I am. I'll just lie here for a while and relax and get some of the story on tape. This suit's got a built-in recorder. I might as well use it. That way, even if I'm not as well as I feel, I'll leave a message. You probably know we're back and wonder what went wrong. I suppose I'm in a state of shock. That's why I can't seem to get up. Who wouldn't be shocked after luck like that? I've always been lucky, I guess. Luck got me a place in the Whale. Sure, I'm a good astronomer, but so are lots of other guys. If I were 10 years older, it would have been an honor. Being picked for the first long jump in the first starship ever. At my age, it was luck. You'll want to know if the ship worked. Well, she did. Went like a bomb. We got lined up between Earth and Mars, you remember, and James pushed the button marked jump. Took his finger off the button, and there we were, Alpha Centauri. 2 months later your time, 1 second later by us. We covered our whole survey assignment like that, smooth as a pint of old and mild, which right now I could certainly use. Better yet would be a pint of hot black coffee with sugar in. Failing that, I could even go for a long drink of cold water. There was never anything wrong with the Whale till right at the end, and even then I doubt if it was the ship itself that fouled things up. That was some survey assignment. We astronomers really lived. Wait till you see, but of course you won't. I could weep when I think of those miles of lovely color film all gone up in smoke. I'm shocked, all right. I never said who I was. Matt Hennessy from Farside Observatory, back of the moon, just back from a proving flight cum astronomical survey in the starship Whale. Whoever you are who finds this tape, you're made. Take it to any radio station or newspaper office. You'll find you can name your price and don't take any wooden nickels. Where had I got to? I told you how we happened to find Chang, hadn't I? That's what the natives called it. Walking, talking natives on a blue sky planet with 1.1 g gravity and a 20% oxygen atmosphere at 15 psi. The odds against finding Chang on a 6-month survey on the first star jump ever must be up in the Googles. We certainly were lucky. The Chang natives aren't very technical, haven't got space travel, for instance. They're good astronomers, though. We were able to show them our sun in their telescopes. In their way, they're a highly civilized people. Look more like cats than people, but they're people, all right. If you doubt it, chew these facts over. 1. They learned our language in 4 weeks. When I say they, I mean a 10-man team of them. 2. They brew a near beer that's a lot nearer than the canned stuff we had aboard the Whale. 3. They've a great sense of humor. Ran rather to silly practical jokes, but still. Can't say I care for that hot foot and belly laugh stuff myself, but tastes differ. 4. The 10-man language team also learned chess and table tennis. But why go on? People who talk English, drink beer, like jokes, and beat me at chess or table tennis are people for my money, even if they look like tigers in trousers. It was funny the way they won all the time at table tennis. They certainly weren't so hot at it. Maybe that 10% extra gravity put us off our strokes. As for chess, Sven Love was our champion. He won sometimes. The rest of us seemed to lose whichever Qingxi we played. There again, it wasn't so much that they were good. How could they be in the time? It was, well, then we all seemed to make silly mistakes when we played them, and that's fatal in chess. Of course, it's a screwy situation playing chess with something that grows its own fur coat, has yellow eyes 1.5 inches long, and long white whiskers. Could you have kept your mind on the game? And don't think I fell victim to their feline charm. The children were pets, but you didn't feel like patting the adults on their big grinning heads. Personally, I didn't like the one I knew best. He was called, well, we called him Charlie, and he was the ethnologist, ambassador, contact man, or whatever you like to call him, who came back with us. Why I disliked him was because he was always trying to get the edge on you. All the time he had to be top. Great sense of humor, of course. I nearly broke my neck on that butter slide he fixed up in the metal alleyway to the Whale's engine room. Charlie laughed fit to bust. Everyone laughed. I even laughed myself, though doing it hurt me more than the tumble had. Yes, life and soul of the party, old Charlie. My last sight of the minnow was a cabin full of dead and dying men, the sweetish stink of burnt flesh and the choking reek of scorching insulation, the boat jolting and shuddering and beginning to break up, and in the middle of the flames, still unhurt, was Charlie. He was laughing. My God, it's dark out here. Wonder how high I am. Must be all of 50 miles and doing 800 miles an hour at least. I'll be doing more than that when I land. What's final velocity for a 50-mile fall? Same as a 50,000-mile fall, I suppose. Same as escape. 24,000 miles an hour. I'll make a mess. That's better. Why didn't I close my eyes before? Those star streaks made me dizzy. I'll make a nice shooting star when I hit air. Come to think of it, I must be deep in air now. Let's take a look. It's getting lighter. Look at those peaks down there. Like great, Knives. I don't seem to be falling as fast as I expected, though. Almost seem to be floating. Let's switch on the radio and tell the world hello. Hello, Earth. Hello again. And goodbye. Sorry about that, I passed out. I don't know what I said, if anything, and the suit recorder has no playback or eraser. What must have happened is that the suit ran out of oxygen, and I lost consciousness due to anoxia. I dreamed I switched on the radio, but I actually switched on the emergency tank, thank the Lord, and that brought me round. Come to think of it, why not crack the suit and breathe fresh air instead of bottled? Nah, I'd have to get up to do that. I think I'll just lie here a little bit longer and get properly rested up before I try anything big like standing up. I was telling about the return journey, wasn't I? The long jump back home, which should have dumped us between the orbits of Earth and Mars, instead of which, when James took his finger off the button, the mass detector showed nothing except the noise level of the universe. We were out in that no place for a day. We astronomers had to establish our exact position relative to the solar system. The crew had to find out exactly what went wrong. The physicists had to make mystic passes in front of meters and mutter about residual folds in stress-free space. Our task was easy because we were about half a light year from the sun. The crew's job was also easy. They found what went wrong in less than half an hour. It still seems incredible. To program the ship for a star jump, you merely told it where you were and where you wanted to go. In practical terms, that entailed first a series of exact measurements which had to be translated into the somewhat abstruse coordinate system we used based on the topological order of mass points in the galaxy. Then you cut a tape on the computer and hit the button. Nothing was wrong with the computer. Nothing was wrong with the engines. We'd hit the right button and we'd gone to the place we'd aimed for. All we'd done was aim for the wrong place. It hurts me to tell you this, and I'm just attached personnel with no spaceflight tradition. In practical terms, one highly trained crew member had punched a wrong pattern of holes on the tape. Another, equally skilled, had failed to notice this when reading back. A childish error, highly improbable, twice repeated, thus squaring the improbability. Incredible, but that's what happened. Anyway, we took good care with the next lot of measurements. That's why we were out there so long. They were cross-checked about 5 times. I got sick, so I climbed into a spacesuit and went outside and took some photographs of the sun, which I hoped would help to determine hydrogen density in the outer regions. When I got back, everything was ready. We disposed ourselves about the control room and relaxed for all we were worth. We were all praying that this time nothing would go wrong, and all looking forward to seeing Earth again after 4 months' subjective time away, except for Charlie, who was still chuckling and shaking his head, and Captain James, who was glaring at Charlie and obviously wishing human dignity permitted him to tear Charlie limb from limb. Then James pressed the button. Everything twanged like a bowstring. I felt myself turned inside out, passed through a small sieve and poured back into shape. The entire bow wall screen was full of earth. Something was wrong, all right, and this time it was much, much worse. We'd come out of the jump about 200 miles above the Pacific, pointed straight down, traveling at a relative speed of about 2,000 miles an hour. It was a fantastic situation. Here was the Whale, the most powerful ship ever built, which could cover 50 light-years in a subjective time of 1 second, and it was helpless. For, as of course you know, The star drive couldn't be used again for at least 2 hours. The Whale also had ion rockets, of course, the standard deuterium fusion thing with direct conversion. As again you know, this is good for interplanetary flight because you can run it continuously and it has extremely high exhaust velocity. But in our situation it was no good, because it has rather a low thrust. It would have taken more time than we had to deflect us enough to avoid a smash. We had 5 minutes to abandon ship. James got us all into the minnow at a dead run. There was no time to take anything at all except the clothes we stood in. The minnow was meant for short, heavy hops to planets or asteroids. In addition to the ion drive, it had emergency atomic rockets using steam for reaction mass. We thanked God for that when Kazamian cancelled our downwards velocity with them in a few seconds. We curved away up over China, and from about 50 miles high, we saw the Whale hit the Pacific. 600 tons of mass at well over 2,000 miles an hour make an almighty splash. By now you'll have divers down, but I doubt they'll salvage much you can use. I wonder why James went down with the ship, as the saying is. Not that it made any difference. It must have broken his heart to know that his lovely ship was getting the chopper. Or did he suspect another human error? We didn't have time to think about that, or even to get the radio working. The steam rockets blew up. Poor Kazamian was burnt to a crisp. Only thing that saved me was the spacesuit I was still wearing. I snapped the faceplate down because the cabin was filling with fumes. I saw Charlie coming out of the toilet, that's how he'd escaped, and I saw him beginning to laugh. Then the port side collapsed, and I fell out. I saw the launch spinning away, glowing red against the purplish-black sky. I tumbled head over heels towards the huge curved shield of Earth 50 miles below. I shut my eyes, and that's about all I remember. I don't see how any of us could have survived. I think we're all dead. I'll have to get up and crack this suit and let some air in. But I can't. I fell 50 miles without a parachute. I'm dead, so I can't stand up. There was silence for a while except for the vicious howl of the wind. Then snow began to shift on the ledge. A man crawled stiffly out and came shakily to his feet. He moved slowly around for some time. After about 2 hours he returned to the hollow, squatted down, and switched on the recorder. The voice began again, considerably warier. "Hello there. I'm in the bleakest wilderness I've ever seen. This place makes the moon look cozy. There's precipice around me every way but one, and that's up. So it's up I'll have to go till I find a way to go down. I've been chewing snow to quench my thirst, but I could eat a horse. I picked up a shortwave broadcast on my suit, but couldn't understand a word. Not English, nor French, and there I stick. Listened to it for 15 minutes just to hear a human voice again. I haven't much hope of reaching anyone with my 5 milliwatt suit transmitter, but I'll keep trying. Just before I start the climb, there are 2 things I want to get on tape. The first is how I got here. I've remembered something from my military training when I did some parachute jumps. Terminal velocity for a human body falling through air is about 120 miles per hour. Falling 50 miles is no worse than falling 500 feet. You'd be lucky to live through a 500-foot fall, true, but I've been lucky. The suit is bulky but light and probably slowed my fall. I hit a 60-mile-an-hour updraft this side of the mountain, skidded downhill through about half a mile of snow, and fetched up in a drift. The suit is part worn but still operational. I'm fine. The second thing I want to say is about the Qingxi, and here it is. Watch out for them. Those jokers are dangerous. I'm not telling how, because I've got a scientific reputation to watch. You'll have to figure it out for yourselves. Here are the clues. 1. The Qingxi talk and laugh, but after all they aren't human. On an alien world 100 light years away, why shouldn't alien talents develop? A talent that's so uncertain and rudimentary here that most people don't believe it might be highly developed out there. 2. The whale expedition did fine till it found Chang. Then it hit a seam of bad luck. Real stinking bad luck that went on and on till it looks fishy. We lost the ship, we lost the launch, all but one of us lost our lives. We couldn't even win a game of ping pong. So, what is luck, good or bad? Scientifically speaking, future chance events are by definition chance. They can turn out favorable or not. When a preponderance of chance events has occurred unfavorably, you've got bad luck. It's a fancy name for a lot of chance results that didn't go your way. But the gambler defines it differently. For him, luck refers to the future, and you've got bad luck when future chance events won't go your way. Scientific investigations into this have been inconclusive, but everyone knows that some people are lucky and others aren't. All we've got are hints and glimmers, the fumbling touch of a rudimentary talent. There's the evil eye legend and the Jonah, bad luck bringers. Superstition, maybe. But ask the insurance companies about accident prones. What's in a name? Call a man unlucky and you're superstitious. Call him accident prone, and that's sound business sense. I've said enough. All the same, search the spaceflight records. Talk to the actuaries. When a ship is working perfectly and is operated by a hand-picked crew of highly trained men in perfect condition, how often is it wrecked by a series of silly errors happening one after another in defiance of probability? I'll sign off with 2 thoughts, one depressing and one cheering. A single Qingxi wrecked our ship and our launch. What could a whole planetful of them do? On the other hand, a talent that manipulates chance events is bound to be chancy. No matter how highly developed, it can't be surefire. The proof is that I've survived to tell the tale. At 20 below zero and 50 miles an hour, the wind ravaged the mountain. Peering through his polarized visor at the white waste and the snow-filled air howling over it, sliding and stumbling with every step on a slope that got gradually steeper and seemed to go on forever, Matt Hennessy began to inch his way up the north face of Mount Everest. End of Accidental Death by Peter Bailey.
As Easy as ABC by Rudyard Kipling. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adrian Stroett, Turks and Caicos Islands. As Easy as ABC by Rudyard Kipling. Isn't it almost time that our planet took some interest in the proceedings of the Aerial Board of Control? One knows that easy communications nowadays, and lack of privacy in the past, have killed all curiosity among mankind, but as the board's official reporter, I'm bound to tell my tale. At 9:30 a.m. August 26, AD 2065, the board, sitting in London, was informed by De Forest that the District of Northern Illinois had riotously cut itself out of all systems, and would remain disconnected till the board should take over and administer it direct. Every Northern Illinois freight and passenger tower was, he reported, out of action. All district main, local and guiding lights had been extinguished. All general communications were dumb, and through traffic had been diverted. No reason had been given, but he gathered unofficially from the mayor of Chicago that the district complained of crowd-making and invasion of privacy. As a matter of fact, it is of no importance whether Northern Illinois stay in or out of planetary circuit. As a matter of policy, any complaint of invasion of privacy needs immediate investigation, lest worse follow. At 9:45 a.m., DeForest, Dragomirov, Russia, Takahira, Japan, and Pirillo, Italy, were empowered to visit Illinois and to take such steps as might be necessary for the resumption of traffic and all that implies. By 10 a.m. the hall was empty, and the 4 members and I were aboard what Pirillo insisted on calling my little godchild, that is to say, the new Victor Pirillo. Our planet prefers to know Victor Pirillo as a gentle grey-haired enthusiast who spends his time near Foggia, inventing or creating new breeds of Spanish-Italian olive trees. But there is another side to his nature, the manufacture of quaint inventions, of which the Victor Pirillo is, perhaps, not the least surprising. She and a few score sister craft of the same type embody his latest ideas, but she is not comfortable. An ABC boat does not take the air with the level-keeled lift of a liner, but shoots up rocket fashion like the aeroplane of our ancestors, and makes her height at top speed from the first. That is why I found myself sitting suddenly on the large lap of Eustace Arnott, who commands the ABC fleet. One knows vaguely that there is such a thing as a fleet somewhere on the planet, and that, theoretically, it exists for the purposes of what used to be known as war. Only a week before, while visiting a glacier sanatorium behind Gotthaven, I had seen some squadrons making false auroras far to the north while they manoeuvred round the pole, but naturally it had never occurred to me that the things could be used in earnest. Said Arnott to DeForest as I staggered to a seat on the chart-room divan, "We're tremendously grateful to him in Illinois. We've never had a chance of exercising all the fleet together. I've turned in a general call, and I expect we'll have at least 200 keels aloft this evening." "Well aloft?" DeForest asked. "Of course, sir. Out of sight till they're called for." Arnott laughed as he lolled over the transparent chart table where the map of the summer blue Atlantic slid along degree by degree in exact answer to our progress. Our dial already showed 320 miles per hour, and we were 2,000 feet above the uppermost traffic lines. "Now, where is this Illinois district of yours?" said Dragomirov. "One travels so much, one sees so little. Oh, I remember. It is in North America." DeForest, whose business it is to know the out districts, told us that it lay at the foot of Lake Michigan. A road to nowhere in particular, was about half an hour's run from end to end, and, except in one corner, as flat as the sea. Like most flat countries nowadays, it was heavily guarded against invasion of privacy by forced timber, 50-foot spruce and tamarack, grown in 5 years. The population was close on 2 millions, largely migratory between Florida and California, with a backbone of small farms. They call 1,000 acres a farm in Illinois, whose owners come into Chicago for amusements and society during the winter. They were, he said, noticeably kind, quiet folk, but a little exacting, as all flat countries must be, in their notions of privacy. There had, for instance, been no printed news sheet in Illinois for 27 years. Chicago argued that engines for printed news sooner or later developed into engines for invasion of privacy, which in turn might bring the old terrors of crowds and blackmail back to the planet. So, news sheets were not. "And that's Illinois," DeForest concluded. "You see, in the old days she was in the forefront of what they used to call progress, and Chicago—" "Chicago," said Takahira. "That's the little place where there is Salati's statue of the nigger in flames. A fine bit of old work." "When did you see it?" asked DeForest quickly. "They only unveil it once a year." "I know. At Thanksgiving. It was then," said Takahira with a shudder. "And they sang MacDonald's song too." "Phew!" DeForest whistled. I did not know that. I wished you'd told me before. MacDonald's song may have had its uses when it was composed, but it was an infernal legacy for any man to leave behind. It's protective instinct, my dear fellows, said Pirillo, rolling a cigarette. The planet, she has had her dose of popular government. She suffers from inherited agoraphobia. She has no, use for crowds. Dragomirov leaned forward to give him a light. Certainly, said the white-bearded Russian. The planet has taken all precautions against crowds for the past 100 years. What is our total population today? 600 million, we hope. 500 million, we think. But if next year's census shows more than 450, I myself will eat all the extra little babies. We have cut the birth rate out, right out. For a long time we have said to Almighty God, "Thank you, sir, but we do not much like your game of life, so we will not play." Anyhow, said Arnott defiantly, men live a century apiece on the average now. Oh, that is quite well. I am rich, you are rich, we are all rich and happy because we are so few, and we live so long. Only I think, Almighty God, He will remember what the planet was like in the times of crowds and the plague. Perhaps He will send us nerves. Eh, Pirillo? The Italian blinked into space. Perhaps, he said, He has sent them already. Anyhow, you cannot argue with the planet. She does not forget the old days. And what can you do? For sure we cannot remake the world. De Forest glanced at the map flowing smoothly across the table from west to east. We ought to be over our ground by 9 tonight. There won't be much sleep afterwards. On which hint we dispersed, and I slept till Takahiro waked me for dinner. Our ancestors thought 9 hours sleep ample for their little lives. We, living 30 years longer, feel ourselves defrauded with less than 11 out of the 24. By 10 o'clock we were over Lake Michigan. The west shore was lightless except for a dull ground glare at Chicago and a single traffic-directing light, its leading beam pointing north at Waukegan on our starboard bow. None of the lake villages gave any sign of life, and inland westward, so far as we could see, blackness lay unbroken on the level earth. We swooped down and skimmed low across the dark, throwing calls county by county. Now and again we picked up the faint glimmer of a house light, or heard the rasp and rend of the cultivator being played across the fields. But northern Illinois as a whole was one inky, apparently uninhabited, waste of high forest woods. Only our illuminated map, with its little pointers switching from county to county as we wheeled and twisted, gave us any idea of our position. Our calls, urgent, pleading, coaxing, or commanding, through the general communicator brought no answer. Illinois strictly maintained her own privacy in the timber which she grew for that purpose. "Oh, this is absurd," said De Forest. "We're like an owl trying to work a wheat field. Is this Bureau Creek? Let's land, Arnott, and get hold of someone." We brushed over a belt of forest woodland, 15-year-old maples 60 feet high, grounded on a private meadow dock, none too big, where we moored to our own grapnels, and hurried out through the warm, dark night towards a light in a veranda. As we neared the garden gate, I could have sworn we had stepped knee-deep in quicksand, for we could scarcely drag our feet against the prickling currents that clogged them. After 5 paces we stopped, wiping our foreheads, as hopelessly stuck on dry, smooth turf as so many cows in a bog. "Pest!" cried Pirillo angrily. "We are ground-circuited, and it is my own system of ground circuits too. I know the pull." "Good evening," said a girl's voice from the veranda. "Oh, I'm sorry. We've locked up. Wait a minute." We heard the click of a switch and almost fell forward as the currents round our knees were withdrawn. The girl laughed and laid aside her knitting. An old-fashioned controller stood by her elbow, which she reversed from time to time, and we could hear the snort and clank of the obedient cultivator half a mile away, behind the guardian woods. "Come in and sit down," she said. "I'm only playing a plough. Dad's gone to Chicago to—" "Ah, then it was your call I heard just now." She had caught sight of Arnott's board uniform, leapt to the switch and turned it full on. We were checked, gasping, waist-deep in current this time, 3 yards from the veranda. "We only want to know what's the matter with Illinois," said De Forest placidly. "Then hadn't you better go to Chicago and find out?" she answered. There's nothing wrong here. We own ourselves. How can we go anywhere if you won't loose us? DeForest went on while Arnott scowled. Admirals of fleets are still quite human when their dignity is touched. Stop a minute. You don't know how funny you look. She put her hands on her hips and laughed mercilessly. Don't worry about that, said Arnott, and whistled. A voice answered from the Victor Pirillo in the meadow. Only a single fuse ground circuit, Arnott called. Sort it out gently, please. We heard the ping of a breaking lamp. A fuse blew out somewhere in the veranda roof, frightening a nestful of birds. The ground circuit was open. We stooped and rubbed our tingling ankles. How rude! How very rude of you! The maiden cried. Sorry, but we haven't time to look funny, said Arnott. We've got to go to Chicago, and if I were you, young lady, I'd go into the cellars for the next 2 hours and take Mother with me. Off he strode, with us at his heels muttering indignantly, till the humour of the thing struck and doubled him up with laughter at the foot of the gangway ladder. The board hasn't shown what you might call a fat spark on this occasion, said DeForest, wiping his eyes. I hope I didn't look as big a fool as you did, Arnott. Hello, what on earth is that? Dad coming home from Chicago? There was a rattle and a rush, and a 5-plough cultivator, blades in air like so many teeth, trundled itself at us around the edge of the timber, fuming and sparking furiously. Jump! said Arnott as we bundled ourselves through the none-too-wide door. Never mind about shutting it. Up! The Victor Pirillo lifted like a bubble, and the vicious machine shot just underneath us, clawing high as it passed. There's a nice little spit kitten for you, said Arnott, dusting his knees. We ask her a civil question. First she circuits us, and then she plays a cultivator at us. And then we fly, said Dragomirov. If I was 40 years more young, I would go back and kiss her. Ho, ho. I, said Pirillo, would smack her. My pet ship has been chased by a dirty plough. How do you say, agricultural implement. Oh, that is Illinois all over, said DeForest. They don't content themselves with talking about privacy. They arrange to have it. And now, where's your alleged fleet, Arnott? We must assert ourselves against this wench. Arnott pointed to the black heavens. Waiting on, up there, said he. Shall I give them the whole installation, sir? Oh, I don't think the young lady is quite worth that, said DeForest. Get over Chicago and perhaps we'll see something. In a few minutes we are hanging at 2,000 feet over an oblong block of incandescence in the centre of the little town. That looks like the old city hall. Yes, there's Salati's statue in front of it, said Takahira. But what on earth are they doing to the place? I thought they used it for a market nowadays. Drop a little, please. We could hear the sputter and crackle of road surfacing machines, the cheap Western type that fuse stone and rubbish into lava-like ribbed glass for their rough country roads. 3 or 4 surfacers worked on each side of a square of ruins. The brick and stone wreckage crumbled, slid forward, and presently spread out into white-hot pools of sticky slag, which the levelling rods smoothed more or less flat. Already a third of the big block had been so treated, and was cooling to dull red before our astonished eyes. It is the old market, said DeForest. Well, there's nothing to prevent Illinois from making a road through a market. It doesn't interfere with traffic, that I can see. Hush, said Arnott, gripping me by the shoulder. Listen, they're singing. Why on earth are they singing? We dropped again till we could see the black fringe of people at the edge of that glowing square. At first, they only roared against the roar of the surfacers and levellers. Then the words came up clearly, the words of the forbidden song that all men knew, and none let pass their lips. Poor Pat McDonough's song, made in the days of the crowds and the plague, every single word of it loaded to sparking point with the planet's inherited memories of horror, panic, fear, and cruelty. And Chicago, innocent, contented little Chicago, was singing it aloud to the infernal tune that carried riot, pestilence, and lunacy around our planet only a few generations ago. Once there was the people, terror gave it birth. Once there was the people, and it made a hell of earth. Then the stamp and pause. Earth arose and crushed it. Listen, O ye slain. Once there was the people, It shall never be again. The levellers thrust in savagely against the ruins as the song renewed itself again, and again, louder than the crash of the melting walls. DeForest frowned. "I don't like that," he said. "They've broken back to the old days. They'll be killing somebody soon. I think we'd better divert 'em, Arnott." "Aye, aye, sir." Arnott's hand went to his cap, and we heard the hull of the Victor Pirillo ring to the command. "Lamps! Both watchers stand by! Lamps! Lamps! Lamps!" "Keep still," Takahira whispered to me. "Blinkers, please, quartermaster." "It's all right," said Pirillo from behind, and to my horror slipped over my head some sort of rubber helmet that locked with a snap. I could feel thick colloid bosses before my eyes, but I stood in absolute darkness. "To save the sight," he explained, and pushed me onto the chart room divan. "You will see in a minute." As he spoke, I became aware of a thin thread of almost intolerable light, let down from the heavens at an immense distance. One vertical hair's breadth of frozen lightning. "Those are our flanking ships," said Arnott at my elbow. "That one is over Galena. Look south. That other one's over Keithburg. Vincennes is behind us, and north yonder is Winthrop Woods. The fleet's in position, sir." This to DeForest. "As soon as you give the word." "Ah, no, no!" cried Dragomirov at my side. I could feel the old man tremble. "I do not know all that you can do, but be kind. I ask you to be a little kind to them below. This is horrible, horrible." "When a woman kills a chicken, dynasties and empires sicken," Takahira quoted. "It is too late to be gentle now." "Then take off my helmet! Take off my helmet!" Dragomirov began hysterically. Pirillo must have put his arm around him. "Hush," he said. "I am here. It is all right, Ivan, my dear fellow." "I'll just send our little girl in Bureau County a warning," said Arnott. "She don't deserve it, but we'll allow her a minute or two to take Mama to the cellar." In the utter hush that followed the growling spark, after Arnott had linked up his service communicator with the invisible fleet, we heard McDonough's song from the city beneath us grow fainter as we rose to position. Then I clapped my hand before my mask lenses, for it was as though the floor of heaven had been riddled, and all the inconceivable blaze of suns in the making was poured through the manholes. "You needn't count," said Arnott. I had no thought of such a thing. "There are 250 keels up there, 5 miles apart. Full power, please, for another 12 seconds. The firmament, as far as eye could reach, stood on pillars of white fire. One fell on the glowing square at Chicago and turned it black. "Oh, oh, oh! Can man be allowed to do such things?" Dragomirov cried and fell across our knees. "Glass of water, please," said Takahira to a helmeted shape that leapt forward. "He is a little faint." The light switched off, and the darkness stunned like an avalanche. We could hear Dragomirov's teeth on the glass edge. Pirillo was comforting him. All right, he repeated. "Come and lie down. Come below and take off your mask. I will give you my world, old friend. It is all right. They are my siege lights, little Victor Pirillo's little lights. You know me. I do not hurt people." "Pardon," Dragomirov moaned. "I've never seen death. I've never seen the board take action. Shall we go down and burn them alive, or is that already done?" "Oh, hush," said Pirillo, and I think he rocked him in his arms. "Do we repeat, sir?" Arnott asked DeForest. "Give 'em a minute's break," DeForest replied. "They may need it." We waited a minute, and then McDonough's song, broken but defiant, rose from undefeated Chicago. "They seem fond of that tune," said DeForest. "I should let 'em have it, Arnott." "Very good, sir," said Arnott, and felt his way to the communicator keys. No lights broke forth, but the hollow of the skies made herself the mouth for one note that touched the raw fibre of the brain. Men hear such sounds in delirium, advancing like tides from horizons beyond the ruled foreshores of space. "That's our pitch pipe," said Arnott. "We may be a bit ragged. I've never conducted 250 performers before." He pulled out the couplers and struck a full chord on the service communicators. The beams of light leapt down again and danced solemnly and awfully, a stilt dance, sweeping 30 or 40 miles left and right at each stiff-legged kick, while the darkness delivered itself. There is no scale to measure against that utterance, of the tune to which they kept time. Certain notes, one learnt to expect them with terror, cut through one's marrow, but after 3 minutes, thought and emotion passed in indescribable agony. We saw, we heard, but I think we were in some sort swooning. The 250 beams shifted, reformed, straddled and split, narrowed, widened, rippled in ribbons, broke into 1,000 white-hot parallel lines, melted and revolved in interwoven rings like old-fashioned engine turning, flung up to the zenith, made as if to descend and renew the torment, halted at the last instant, twizzled insanely round the horizon and vanished, to bring back for the 100th time darkness, more shattering than their instantly renewed light over all Illinois. Then the tune and light ceased together, and we heard one single devastating wail that shook all the horizon as a rubbed wet finger shakes the rim of a bowl. "Ah, that is my new siren," said Pirlo. "You can break an iceberg in half if you find the proper pitch. They will whistle by squadrons now. It is the wind through pierced shutters in the bows." I had collapsed beside Dragomirov, broken and snivelling feebly because I had been delivered before my time to all the terrors of the Judgment Day, and the archangels of the resurrection were hailing me naked across the universe to the sound of the music of the spheres. Then I saw De Forest smacking Arnott's helmet with his open hand. The wailing died down in a long shriek as a black shadow swooped past us and returned to her place above the lower clouds. "I hate to interrupt a specialist when he's enjoying himself," said De Forest, "but as a matter of fact, all Illinois has been asking us to stop for the last 15 seconds. What a pity." Arnott slipped off his mask. "I wanted you to hear us really hum. Our lowest C will lift street paving." "It is hell! Hell!" cried Dragomirov, and sobbed aloud. Arnott looked away as he answered, "It's a few thousand volts ahead of the old shoot 'em and sink 'em game, but I should scarcely call it that. What shall I tell the fleet, sir?" "Tell 'em we're pleased and impressed. I don't think they need wait on any longer. There isn't a spark left down there." De Forest pointed. "They'll be deaf and blind." "Oh, I think not, sir. The demonstration lasted less than 10 minutes. "Marvellous," Takahiro sighed. "I should have said it was half a night. Now, shall we go down and pick up the pieces?" "But first a small drink," said Pirlo. "The board must not arrive weeping at its own works." "I am an old fool, Dragomirov began piteously. "I did not know what would happen. It is all new to me. We reason with them in Little Russia." Chicago North landing tower was unlighted, and Arnott worked his ship into the clips by her own lights. As soon as these broke out, we heard groanings of horror and appeal from many people below. "All right," shouted Arnott into the darkness. "We aren't beginning again." We descended by the stairs to find ourselves knee-deep in grovelling crowd, some crying that they were blind, others beseeching us not to make any more noises, but the greater part writhing face downward, their hands or their caps before their eyes. It was Pirlo who came to our rescue. He climbed the side of the surfacing machine, and there, gesticulating as though they could see, made oration to those afflicted people of Illinois. "You stupids," he began, "there is nothing to fuss for. Of course your eyes will smart and be red tomorrow. You will look as if you and your wives had drunk too much, but in a little while you will see again as well as before. I tell you this, and I am Pirlo, Victor Pirlo." The crowd with one accord shuddered, for many legends attached to Victor Pirlo of Foggia, deep in the secrets of God. "Pirlo?" An unsteady voice lifted itself. "Then tell us, was there anything except light in those lights of yours just now?" The question was repeated from every corner of the darkness. Pirlo laughed. "No," he thundered. "Why have small men such large voices? I give you my word and the board's word that there is nothing except light, just light. You stupids! Your birth rate is too low already as it is. Some day I must invent something to send it up, but send it down never. Is that true? We thought, somebody said—" One could feel the tension relax all round. "You two big fools," Pirlo cried. "You could have sent us a call and we would have told you." "Send you a call?" a deep voice shouted. "I wish you had been at our end of the wire." "I'm glad I wasn't," said De Forest. "It was bad enough from behind the lamps. Never mind, it's over now. Is there anyone here I can talk business with? I'm De Forest, for the board." "You might begin with me, for one. I'm mayor," the bass voice replied. A big man rose unsteadily from the street and staggered towards us, where we sat on the broad turf edging in front of the garden fences. "I ought to be the first on my feet. Am I?" said he. "Yes," said De Forest, and steadied him as he dropped down beside us. "Hello, Andy. Is that you?" a voice called. "Excuse me," said the mayor. "That sounds like my chief of police, Bluthner." "Bluthner, is it? And here's Mulligan and Keefe on their feet. Bring 'em up, please, Blut. We're supposed to be the four in charge of this hamlet. What we say goes. And De Forest, what do you say?" "Nothing, yet," De Forest answered, as we made room for the panting, reeling men. "You've cut out of system. Well?" "Tell the steward to send down drinks, please," Arnott whispered to an orderly at his side. "Good," said the mayor, smacking his dry lips. "Now I suppose we can take it, De Forest, that henceforward the board will administer us direct." "Not if the board can avoid it," De Forest laughed. "The ABC is responsible for the planetary traffic only." "And all that implies," the big four who ran Chicago chanted their Magna Charta like children at school. "Well, get on," said De Forest warily. "What is your silly trouble anyway?" "Too much damn democracy," said the mayor, laying his hand on De Forest's knee. "So? I thought Illinois had her dose of that." "She has. That's why." "Blut, what did you do with our prisoners last night?" "Locked 'em in the water tower to prevent the women killing 'em," the chief of police replied. "I'm too blind to move just yet, but—" "Arnott, send some of your people, please, and fetch 'em along," said De Forest. "They're triple-circuited," the mayor called. "You'll have to blow out 3 fuses." He turned to De Forest, his large outline just visible in the paling darkness. "I hate to throw any more work on the board. I'm an administrator myself, but we've had a little fuss over our serviles. What? In a big city there's bound to be a few men and women who can't live without listening to themselves, and who prefer drinking out of pipes they don't own both ends of. They inhabit flats and hotels all the year round. They say it saves them trouble. Anyway, it gives them more time to make trouble for their neighbours. We call them serviles locally, and they are apt to be tuberculous." "Just so," said the man called Mulligan. "Transportation is civilization, democracy is disease. I've proved it by the blood test every time." "Mulligan's our health officer, and a one-idea man," said the mayor, laughing. "But it's true that most serviles haven't much control. They will talk, and when people take to talking as a business, anything may arrive, mayn't it, De Forest?" "Anything, except the facts of the case," said De Forest, laughing. "I'll give you those in a minute," said the mayor. "Our serviles got to talking, first in their houses and then on the streets, telling men and women how to manage their own affairs. You can't teach a servile not to finger his neighbour's soul. That's invasion of privacy, of course, but in Chicago we'll suffer anything sooner than make crowds. Nobody took much notice and so I let 'em alone. My fault. I was warned there would be trouble, but there hasn't been a crowd or murder in Illinois for 19 years. 22, said his chief of police. Likely. Anyway, we'd forgot such things. So, from talking in the houses and on the streets, our serviles go to calling a meeting at the old market yonder. He nodded across the square, where the wrecked buildings heaved up grey in the dawn glimmer behind the square-case statue of the Negro in flames. "There's nothing to prevent anyone calling meetings except that it's against human nature to stand in a crowd, besides being bad for the health. I ought to have known by the way our men and women attended that first meeting that trouble was brewing. There were as many as 1,000 in the marketplace, touching each other. Touching! Then the serviles turned in old tongue switches and talked, and we—" "What did they talk about?" said Takahiro. "First, how badly things were managed in the city. That pleased us four. We were on the platform, because we hoped to catch one or two good men for city work. You know how rare executive capacity is. Even if we didn't, it's refreshing to find anyone interested enough in our job to damn our eyes. You don't know what it means to work year in, year out without a spark of difference with a living soul." "Oh, don't we?" said DeForest. "There are times on the board when we'd give our positions, if anyone would kick us out and take hold of things themselves." "But they won't," said the mayor ruefully. "I assure you, sir, we four have done things in Chicago in the hope of rousing people that would have discredited Nero. But what do they say? 'Very good, Andy. Have it your own way. Anything's better than a crowd. I'll go back to my land.' You can't do anything with folk who can go where they please and don't want anything on God's earth except their own way. There isn't a kick or a kicker left on the planet." "Then I suppose that little shed yonder fell down by itself," said DeForest. We could see the bare and still smoking ruins and hear the slag pools crackle as they hardened and set. "Oh, that's only amusement. Tell you later. As I was saying, our serviles held the meeting, and pretty soon we had to ground circuit the platform to save them from being killed, and that didn't make our people any more pacific." "How do you mean?" I ventured to ask. "If you've ever been ground circuited," said the mayor, "you'll know it don't improve any man's temper to be held up straining against nothing. No, sir. 800 or 900 folk kept pawing and buzzing like flies in treacle for 2 hours, while a pack of perfectly safe serviles invades their mental and spiritual privacy, may be amusing to watch, but they are not pleasant to handle afterwards." Pirillo chuckled. "Our folk own themselves. They were of opinion things were going too far and too fiery. I warn the serviles, but they're born house-dwellers. Unless a fact hits them on the head, they cannot see it. Would you believe me? They went on to talk about what they called popular government. They did. They wanted us to go back to the old voodoo business of voting with papers and wooden boxes and word-drunk people and printed formulas and news sheets. They said they practiced it among themselves about what they'd have to eat in their flats and hotels. Yes, sir. They stood up behind Bluthner's doubled ground circuits and they said that, in this present year of grace, 2 self-owning men and women on that very spot. Then they finished." He lowered his voice cautiously, "by talking about the people. And then Bluthner, he had to sit up all night in charge of the circuits because he couldn't trust his men to keep him shut." "I was trying 'em too high," the chief of police broke in. "But we couldn't hold the crowd ground-circuited forever. I gathered in all the serviles on charge of crowd-making and put 'em in the water tower. Then I let things cut loose. I had to. The district lit like a sparked gas tank. The news was out over 7 degrees of country," the mayor continued. "And when once it's a question of invasion of privacy, goodbye to right and reason in Illinois. They began turning out traffic lights and locking up landing towers on Thursday night. Friday they stopped all traffic and asked for the board to take over. Then they wanted to clean Chicago off the side of the lake and rebuild elsewhere, just for a souvenir of the people that the serviles talked about. I suggested that they should slag the old market where the meeting was held while I turned in a call to you all on the board. That kept him quiet till you came along, and now you can take hold of the situation." "Any chance of their quieting down?" DeForest asked. "You can try," said the mayor. DeForest raised his voice in the face of the reviving crowd that had edged in towards us. Day was come. "Don't you think this business can be arranged?" he began, but there was a roar of angry voices. "We've finished with crowds. We aren't going back to the old days. Take us over. Take the serviles away. Administer direct or we'll kill 'em. Down with the people. An attempt was made to begin MacDonald's song. It got no further than the first line, for the Victor Pirillos sent down a warning drone on one stopped horn. A wrecked sidewall of the old market tottered and fell inwards on the slag pools. None spoke or moved till the last of the dust had settled down again, turning the steel case of Salaty's statue ashy grey. "You see, you'll just have to take us over," the mayor whispered. De Forest shrugged his shoulders. "You talk as if executive capacity could be snatched out of the air like so much horsepower. Can't you manage yourselves on any terms?" he said. "We can, if you say so. It will only cost those few lives to begin with." The mayor pointed across the square, where Arnott's men guided a stumbling group of 10 or 12 men and women to the lakefront and halted them under the statue. "Now I think," said Takahira under his breath, "there will be trouble." The mass in front of us growled like beasts. At that moment the sun rose clear and revealed the blinking assembly to itself. As soon as it realized that it was a crowd, we saw the shiver of horror and mutual repulsion shoot across it precisely as the steely floors shot across the lake outside. Nothing was said, and, being half blind, of course it moved slowly. Yet in less than 15 minutes most of that vast multitude, 3,000 at the lowest count, melted away like frost on south eaves. The remnant stretched themselves on the grass, where a crowd feels and looks less like a crowd. "These mean business," the mayor whispered to Takahira. "There are a goodish few women there who have borne children. I don't like it." The morning draught off the lake stirred the trees round us with promise of a hot day. The sun reflected itself dazzlingly on the canister-shaped covering of Salaty's statue. Cocks crew in the gardens, and we could hear gate latches clicking in the distance as people stumblingly resought their homes. "I'm afraid there won't be any morning deliveries," said De Forest. "We rather upset things in the country last night." "That makes no odds," the mayor returned. "We're all provisioned for 6 months. We take no chances." Nor, when you come to think of it, does anyone else. It must be 3/4 of a generation since any house or city faced a food shortage. Yet is there a house or city on the planet that has not half a year's provisions laid in? We are like shipwrecked seamen in the old books who, having once nearly starved to death, ever afterwards hide away bits of food and biscuit. Truly we trust no crowds, nor system based on crowds. De Forest waited till the last footstep had died away. Meantime the prisoners at the base of the statue shuffled, posed and fidgeted with the shamelessness of quiet little children. None of them were more than 6 feet high, and many of them were as grey-haired as the ravaged, harassed heads of old pictures. They huddled together in actual touch, while the crowd, spaced at large intervals, looked at them with congested eyes. Suddenly, a man among them began to talk. The mayor had not in the least exaggerated. It appeared that our planet lay sunk in slavery beneath the heel of the aerial board of control. The orator urged us to arise in our might, burst our prison doors and break our fetters. All his metaphors, by the way, were of the most medieval. Next, he demanded that every matter of daily life, including most of the physical functions, should be submitted for decision at any time of the week, month, or year too, I gathered, anybody who happened to be passing by or residing within a certain radius, and that everybody should forthwith abandon his concerns to settle the matter, first by crowd-making, next by talking to the crowds made, and lastly by describing crosses on pieces of paper, which rubbish should later be counted with certain mystic ceremonies and oaths. Out of this amazing play, he assured us, would automatically arise a higher, nobler and kinder world, based, he demonstrated this with the awful lucidity of the insane, based on the sanctity of the crowd and the villainy of the single person. In conclusion, he called loudly upon God to testify to his personal merits and integrity. When the flow ceased, I turned bewildered to Takahira, who was nodding solemnly. "Quite correct," said he. "It is all in the old books. He has left nothing out, not even the war talk." "But I don't see how this stuff can upset a child, much less a district," I replied. "Ah, you are too young," said Dragomirov. "For another thing, you are not a mamma." Please look at the members. 10 or 15 women who remained had separated themselves from the silent men and were drawing in towards the prisoners. It reminded one of the stealthy encircling, before the rush in at the quarry, of wolves round musk oxen in the north. The prisoners saw and drew together more closely. The mayor covered his face with his hands for an instant. De Forest, bareheaded, stepped forward between the prisoners and the slowly, stiffly moving line. "That's all very interesting," he said to the dry-lipped orator, "but the point seems that you've been making crowds and invading privacy." A woman stepped forward and would have spoken, but there was a quick assenting murmur from the men, who realised that De Forest was trying to pull the situation down to ground line. "Yes, yes," they cried. "We cut out because they made crowds and invaded privacy. Stick to that. Keep on that switch. Lift the serviles out of this. The board's in charge. Hush!" "Yes, the board's in charge," said De Forest. "I'll take formal evidence of crowd-making if you like, but the members of the board can testify to it. Will that do?" The women had closed in another pace, with hands that clenched and unclenched at their sides. "Good! Good enough!" the men cried. "We're content. Only take them away, quickly." "Come along up," said De Forest to the captives. "Breakfast is quite ready." It appeared, however, that they did not wish to go. They intended to remain in Chicago and make crowds. They pointed out that De Forest's proposal was gross invasion of privacy. "My dear fellow," said Pirlo to the most voluble of the leaders, "you hurry, or your crowd that can't be wrong will kill you." "But that would be murder," answered the believer in crowds, and there was a roar of laughter from all sides that seemed to show the crisis had broken. A woman stepped forward from the line of women, laughing, I protest, as merrily as any of the company. One hand, of course, shaded her eyes. The other was at her throat. "Oh, they needn't be afraid of being killed," she called. "Not in the least," said De Forest. "But don't you think that, now the board's in charge, you might go home while we get these people away?" "I shall be home long before that. It's been rather a trying day." She stood up to her full height, dwarfing even De Forest's 6'8", and smiled, with eyes closed against the fierce light. "Yes, rather," said De Forest. "I'm afraid you feel the glare a little. We'll have the ship down." He motioned to the Pirlo to drop between us and the sun, and at the same time to loop circuit the prisoners, who were a trifle unsteady. We saw them stiffen to the current where they stood. The woman's voice went on, sweet and deep and unshaken. "I don't suppose you men realise how much this sort of thing means to a woman. I've borne 3. We women don't want our children given to crowds. It must be an inherited instinct. Crowds make trouble. They bring back the old days. Hate, fear, blackmail, publicity. The people. That. She points to the statue, and the crowd growled once more. "Yes, if they are allowed to go on," said De Forest. "But this little affair. It means so much to us women that this little affair should never happen again. Of course, never's a big word, but one feels so strongly that it is important to stop crowds at the very beginning. Those creatures," she pointed with her left hand at the prisoners swaying like seaweed in a tideway as the circuit pulled them. "Those people have friends and wives and children in the city and elsewhere. One doesn't want anything done to them, you know. It's terrible to force a human being out of 50 or 60 years of good life. I'm only 40 myself, I know. But at the same time one feels that an example should be made, because no price is too heavy to pay if these people, and all that they imply, can be put an end to. Do you quite understand? Or would you be kind enough to tell your men to take the casing off the statue? It's worth looking at." "I understand perfectly. But I don't think anybody here wants to see the statue on an empty stomach. Excuse me one moment." De Forest called up to the ship. "A flying loop ready on the port side, if you please." Then to the woman he said with some crispness, "You might leave us a little discretion in the matter." "Oh, of course. Thank you for being so patient. I know my arguments are silly, but—" She half turned away and went on in a changed voice. "Perhaps this will help you decide." She threw out her right arm with a knife in it. Before the blade could be returned to her throat or her bosom, it was twitched from her grip, sparked as if it flew out of the shadow of the ship above, and fell flashing in the sunshine at the foot of the statue 50 yards away. The outflung arm was arrested, rigid as a bar for an instant, till the releasing circuit permitted her to bring it slowly to her side. The other women shrank back, silent among the men. Pirillo rubbed his hands, and Takahiro nodded. "That was clever of you, De Forest," said he. "What a glorious pose," Dragonbirov murmured, for the frightened woman was on the edge of tears. "Why did you stop me? I would have done it," she cried. "I have no doubt you would," said De Forest, "but we can't waste a life like yours on these people. I hope the arrest didn't sprain your wrist. It's so hard to regulate a flying loop. But I think you are quite right about those persons, women and children. We'll take them all away with us if you promise not to do anything stupid to yourself." I promise," she controlled herself with an effort. "But it is so important to us women. We know what it means. And I thought if you saw I was in earnest—" "I saw you were, and you've gained your point. I shall take all your serviles away with me at once. The mayor will make lists of their friends and families in the city and the district, and will ship them after us this afternoon." "Sure," said the mayor, rising to his feet. "Keefe, if you can see, hadn't you better finish levelling off the old market? It don't look sightly the way it is now, and we shan't use it for crowds any more." "I think you had better wipe out that statue as well, Mr. Mayor," said De Forest. "I don't question its merits as a work of art, but I believe it's a shade morbid." "Oh, Keefe, slag the nigger before you go on to fuse the market. I'll get to the communicators and tell the district that the board is in charge. Are you making any special appointments, sir?" "None. We haven't meant to waste on these backwoods. Carry on as before, but under the board. Arnott, run your serviles aboard, please. Ground ship and pass them through the bilge doors. We'll wait till we've finished with this work of art." The prisoners trailed past him, talking fluently but unable to gesticulate in the drag of the current. Then the surfacers rolled up, 2 on each side of the statue. With one accord the spectators looked elsewhere, but there was no need. Keefe turned on full power, and the thing simply melted within its case. All I saw was a surge of white-hot metal pouring over the plinth, a glimpse of Salati's inscription, "To the eternal memory of the justice of the people," ere the stone base itself cracked and powdered into finest lime. The crowd cheered. "Thank you," said De Forest, "but we want our breakfasts, and I expect you do too. Goodbye, Mr. Mayor. Delighted to see you at any time, but I hope I shan't have to, officially, for the next 30 years. Goodbye, madam. Yes, we're all given to nerves nowadays. I suffer from them myself. Goodbye, gentlemen all. You're under the tyrannous heel of the board from this moment, but if ever you feel like breaking your fetters, you've only to let us know. This is no treat to us. Good luck." We embarked amid shouts, and did not check our lift till they had dwindled into whispers. Then De Forest flung himself on the chart-room divan and mopped his forehead. "I don't mind men," he panted, "but women are the devil." "Still the devil," said Pirillo cheerfully. "That one would have suicided." "I know it. That was why I signalled for the flying loop to be clapped on her. I owe you an apology for that, Arnott. I hadn't time to catch your eye and you were busy with our caitiffs. By the way, who actually answered my signal? It was a smart piece of work." "Ilroy," said Arnott, "but he overloaded the wave. It may be pretty gallery work to knock a knife out of a lady's hand, but didn't you notice how she rubbed him? He scorched her fingers. Slovenly, I call it. Far be it from me to interfere with fleet discipline, but don't be too hard on the boy. If that woman had killed herself, they would have killed every servile and everything related to a servile throughout the district by nightfall. That was what she was playing for," Takahiro said, "and with our fleet gone, we could have done nothing to hold them." "I may be an ass enough to walk into a ground circuit," said Arnott, "but I don't dismiss my fleet till I'm reasonably sure that trouble is over. They're in position still, and I intend to keep them there till the serviles are shipped out of the district. That last little crowd meant murder, my friends." "Nerves, all nerves," said Pirillo. "You cannot argue with agoraphobia." "And it is not as if they had seen much death, or is it?" said Takahiro. In all my 90 years, I have never seen death. Dragomirov spoke as one who would excuse himself. Perhaps that is why, last night... Then it came out as we sat over breakfast that, with the exception of Arnott and Pirlo, none of us had ever seen a corpse, or knew in what manner the spirit passes. We're a nice lot to flap about governing the planet, DeForest laughed. I confess, now it's all over, that my main fear was I mightn't be able to pull it off without losing a life. I thought of that too, said Arnott, but there's no death reported, and I've inquired everywhere. What are we supposed to do with our passengers? I've fed 'em. We're between two switches, DeForest drawled. If we drop them in any place that isn't under the board, the natives will make their presence an excuse for cutting out, same as Illinois did, and forcing the board to take over. If we drop them in any place under the board's control, they'll kill them as soon as our backs are turned. If you say so, said Pirlo thoughtfully, I can guarantee that they will become extinct in process of time, quite happily. What is their birth rate now? Go down and ask 'em, said DeForest. I think they might become nervous and tear me to bits, the philosopher of Foggia replied. Not really. Well? Open the bilge doors, said Takahiro with a downward jerk of the thumb. Scarcely, after all the trouble we've taken to save 'em, said DeForest. Try London, Arnott suggested. You could turn Satan himself loose there, and they'd only ask him to dinner. Good man. You've given me an idea. Vincent! Oh, Vincent! He threw the general communicator open so that we could all hear, and in a few minutes the chart room filled with the rich, fruity voice of Leopold Vincent, who has purveyed all London, her choicest amusements for the last 30 years. We answered with expectant grins, as though we were actually in the stalls of, say, the Combination on a first night. We've picked up something in your line, DeForest began. That's good, dear man, if it's old enough. There's nothing to beat the old things for business purposes. Have you seen London, Chatham and Dover at Earl's Court? No? I thought I missed you there. Immense. I've had the real steam locomotive engines built from the old designs, and the iron rails cast specially by hand. Cloth cushions in the carriages too. Immense. And paper railway tickets. And Polly Milton. Polly Milton back again? Said Arnott rapturously. Book me 2 stalls for tomorrow night. What's she singing now, bless her? The old songs. Nothing comes up to the old touch. Listen to this, dear men. Vincent carolled with flourishes. O cruel lamps of London, if tears your lights could drown, your victims' eyes would weep them, O lights of London town. Then they weep. You see, Pirlo waved his hands at us. The old world always wept when it saw crowds together. It did not know why, but it wept. We know why, but we do not weep, except when we pay to be made to be fat. Wicked old Vincent. Old yourself, Vincent laughed. I'm a public benefactor. I keep the world soft and united. And I'm DeForest at the board, said DeForest acidly, trying to get a little business done. As I was saying, I've picked up a few people in Chicago. I cut out. Chicago is... Do listen. They're perfectly unique. Do they build houses of baked mud blocks while you wait, eh? That's an old contact. They're an untouched primitive community with all the old ideas. Sewing machines and maypole dancers, cooking on coal gas stoves, lighting pipes with matches and driving horses. Gerolstein tried that last year, an absolute blowout. DeForest plugged him wrathfully and poured out the story of our doings for the last 24 hours on the top note. And they do it all in public, he concluded. You can't stop 'em. The more public, the better they are pleased. They'll talk for hours, like you. Now you can come in again. Do you really mean they know how to vote? Said Vincent. Can they act it? Act? It's their life to 'em. And you never saw such faces, scarred like volcanoes, envy, hatred and malice in plain sight. Wonderfully flexible voices. They weep too. Aloud? In public? I guarantee. Not a spark of shame or reticence in the entire installation. It's the chance of your career. Do you say you've brought their voting props along, those papers and ballot box things? No, confound you. I'm not a luggage lifter. Apply direct to the mayor of Chicago. He'll forward you everything. Well, wait a minute. Did Chicago want to kill him? That'll look well on the communicators. Yes. They were only rescued with difficulty from a howling mob, if you know what that is. But I don't, answered the great Vincent simply. Well then, they'll tell you themselves. They can make speeches hours long. How many are there? By the time we ship 'em all, there'll be perhaps 100, counting children. An old world in miniature. Can't you see it? Yes, but I've got to pay for it, if it's a blowout, dear man. They can sing the old war songs in the streets. They can get word drunk and make crowds and invade privacy in the genuine old-fashioned way, and they'll do the voting trick as often as you ask 'em a question. Too good, said Vincent. You unbelieving Jew. I've got a dozen head aboard here. I'll put you through direct. Sample 'em yourself. He lifted the switch and we listened. Our passengers on the lower deck at once, but not less than 5 at a time, explained themselves to Vincent. They had been taken from the bosom of their families, stripped of their possessions, given food without finger bowls, and cast into captivity in a noisome dungeon. But look here, said Arnott aghast. They're saying what isn't true. My lower deck isn't noisome, and I saw to the finger bowls myself. My people talk like that sometimes in Little Russia, said Dragomirov. We reason with them. We never kill, no. But it's not true, Arnott insisted. What can you do with people who don't tell facts? They're mad. Hush, said Pirolo, his hand to his ear. It is such a little time since all the planet told lies. We heard Vincent silkily sympathetic. Would they, he asked, repeat their assertions in public, before a vast public? Only let Vincent give them a chance, and the planet, they vowed, should ring with their wrongs. Their aim in life, 2 women and a man explained it together, was to reform the world. Oddly enough, this also had been Vincent's life dream. He offered them an arena in which to explain and by their living example to raise the planet to loftier levels. He was eloquent on the moral uplift of a simple, old-world life presented in its entirety to a debauched civilization. Could they, would they, for 3 months certain, devote themselves under his auspices as missionaries to the elevation of mankind at a place called Earl's Court, which he said, with some truth, was one of the intellectual centres of the planet? They thanked him and demanded, we could hear his chuckle of delight, time to discuss and to vote on the matter. The vote, solemnly managed by counting heads, 1 head, 1 vote, was favourable. His offer, therefore, was accepted, and they moved a vote of thanks to him in 2 speeches, one by what they called the proposer, and the other by the seconder. Vincent threw over to us, his voice shaking with gratitude. I've got 'em. Did you hear those speeches? That's nature, dear men. Art can't teach that. And they voted as easily as lying. I've never had a troop of natural liars before. Bless you, dear men. Remember, you're on my free list forever. Anywhere. All of you. Oh, Gerolstein will be sick. Sick! Then you think they'll do? Said De Forest. Do? The little village will go crazy. I'll knock up a series of old-world plays for 'em. Their voices will make you laugh and cry. My God, dear men, where do you suppose they picked up all their misery from? On this sweet earth. I'll have a pageant of the world's beginnings, and Mosenthal shall do the music. I'll go and knock up a village for 'em by tonight. We'll meet you at number 15 West Landing Tower, said De Forest. Remember, the rest will be coming along tomorrow. Let 'em all come, said Vincent. You don't know how hard it is nowadays, even for me, to find something that really gets under the public's damned iridium-plated hide. But I've got it at last. Goodbye. Well, said De Forest when we had finished laughing, if anyone understood corruption in London, I might have played off Vincent against Gerolstein and sold my captives at enormous prices. As it is, I shall have to be their legal adviser tonight when the contracts are signed, and they won't exactly press any commission on me either. Meantime, said Takahiro, We cannot, of course, confine members of Leopold Vincent's last engaged company. Chairs for the ladies, please, Arnott." "Then I go to bed," said De Forest. "I can't face any more women," and he vanished. When our passengers were released and given another meal, finger bowls came first this time, they told us what they thought of us and the board, and, like Vincent, we all marvelled how they had contrived to extract and secrete so much bitter poison and unrest out of the good life God gives us. They raged, they stormed, they palpitated, flushed and exhausted their poor torn nerves, panted themselves into silence, and renewed the senseless, shameless attacks. "But can't you understand," said Pirolo pathetically to a shrieking woman, "that if we'd left you in Chicago, you'd have been killed?" "No, we shouldn't. You were bound to save us from being murdered." "Then we should have had to kill a lot of other people." "That doesn't matter. We were preaching the truth. You can't stop us. We shall go on preaching in London, and then you'll see." "You can see now," said Pirolo, and opened a lower shutter. We were closing on the little village, with her 3,000,000 people spread out at ease inside her ring of girdling main traffic lights. Those 8 fixed beams at Chatham, Tonbridge, Redhill, Dorking, Woking, St Albans, Chipping, Ongar, and Southend. Leopold Vincent's new company looked, with small pale faces, at the silence, the size, and the separated houses. Then some began to weep aloud, shamelessly, always without shame. MacDonough's Song. Whether the state can loose and bind, in heaven as well as on earth, if it be wiser to kill mankind before or after the birth, these are matters of high concern where state-kept schoolmen are. But holy state, we have lived to learn, endeth in holy war. Whether the people be led by the Lord or lured by the loudest throat, if it be quicker to die by the sword or cheaper to die by vote, these are the things we have dealt with once, and they will not rise from their grave, for holy people, however it runs, endeth in holy slave. Whatsoever, for any cause, seeketh to take or give, power above or beyond the laws, suffer it not to live. Holy state or holy king or holy people's will, have no truck with the senseless thing, order the guns and kill. Saying after me, once there was the people, terror gave it birth. Once there was the people, and it made a hell of earth. Earth arose and crushed it. Listen, O ye slain, once there was the people, it shall never be again. End of As Easy as ABC by Rudyard Kipling. Read by Adrian Stroett, Turks and Caicos Islands.
Bridge Crossing by David Dreyfuss. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Perard. Bridge Crossing by Dave Dreyfuss. He knew the city was organized for his individual defense, for it had been that way since he was born. But who was his enemy? In 1849, the mist that sometimes rolled through the Golden Gate was known as fog. In 2149, it had become far more frequent and was known as smog. By 2349, it was fog again. But tonight there was smoke mixed with the fog. Roddy could smell it. Somewhere in the forested ruins, fire was burning. He wasn't worried. The small blaze that smoldered behind him on the cracked concrete floor had consumed everything burnable within blocks. What remained of the gutted concrete office building from which he peered was fireproof. But Roddy was himself aflame with anger. As always, when invaders broke in from the north, He'd been left behind with his nurse, Molly, while the soldiers went out to fight. And nowadays Molly's presence wasn't the comfort it used to be. He felt almost ready to jump out of his skin, the way she rocked and knitted in that grating ruined chair, saying over and over again, "The soldiers don't want little boys. The soldiers don't want little boys. The soldiers don't." "I'm not a little boy," Roddy suddenly shouted. "I'm full grown, and I've never even seen an invader. Why won't you let me go and fight?" Fiercely, he crossed the bare, gritty floor and shook Molly's shoulder. She rattled under his jarring hand and abruptly changed the subject. "A is for atom, B is for bomb, C is for corpse," she chanted. Roddy reached into her shapeless dress and pinched. Lately, that had helped her over these spells, but this time, though it stopped the kindergarten song, the treatment only started something worse. "Was'm hungry," Molly cooed, still rocking. Utterly disgusted, Roddy ripped her head off her neck. It was a completely futile gesture. The complicated mind that had cared for him and taught him speech and the alphabet hadn't made him a mechanic, and his only tool was a broken-handled screwdriver. He was still tinkering when the soldiers came in. While they lined up along the wall, he put Molly's head back on her neck. She gaped cowingly at the new arrivals. "Hello, boys," she simpered. "Looking for a good time?" Roddy slapped her to silence, reflecting briefly that there were many things he didn't know about Molly. But there was work to be done. Carefully he framed the ritual words she'd taught him. "Soldiers, come to attention and report." There were 11 of them, 6 feet tall, with 4 limbs and 8 extremities. They stood uniformly, the thumbs on each pair of hands touching along the center line of the legs, front feet turned out at an angle of 45 degrees, rear feet turned inward at 30 degrees. "Sir," they chorused, "we have met the enemy and he is ours." He inspected them. All were scratched and dented, but one in particular seemed badly damaged. His left arm was almost severed at the shoulder. "Come here, fellow," Roddy said. "Let's see if I can fix that." The soldier took a step forward, lurched suddenly, stopped, and whipped out a bayonet. "Death to invaders!" he yelled, and charged crazily. Molly stepped in front of him. "You aren't being very nice to my baby," she murmured, and thrust her knitting needles into his eyes. Roddy jumped behind him, knocked off his helmet, and pressed a soft spot on his conical skull. The soldier collapsed to the floor. Roddy salvaged and returned Molly's needles. Then he examined the patient, tearing him apart as a boy dismembers an alarm clock. It was lucky he did. The left arm's pair of hands suddenly writhed off the floor in an effort to choke him. But because the arm was detached at the shoulder and therefore blind, he escaped the clutching onslaught and could goad the reflexing hands into assaulting one another harmlessly. Meanwhile, the other soldiers left, except for one, apparently another casualty, who stumbled on his way out and fell into the fire. By the time Roddy had hauled him clear, damage was beyond repair. Roddy swore, then decided to try combining parts of his casualty with pieces of the other to make a whole one. To get more light for the operation, he poked up the fire. Roddy was new at his work and took it seriously. It alarmed him to watch the soldiers melt away, gradually succumbing to battle damage. Shamed him to see the empty ruins burn section by section as the invaders repeatedly broke through and had to be burned out. Soon there would be nothing left of the private property keep out that, according to Molly's bedtime story, the owners had entrusted to them when driven away by radioactivity. Soon the soldiers themselves would be gone. None would remain to guard the city, but a few strayed servants like Molly and an occasional civil defender. And himself, Roddy reflected, spitting savagely into the fire. He might remain, but how he fitted into the picture, he didn't know. And Molly, who claimed to have found him in the ruins after a fight with invaders 20 years before, couldn't or wouldn't say. Well, for as long as possible, Roddy decided he'd do his duty as the others did theirs, single-mindedly. Eventually, the soldiers might accept him as one of themselves. Meanwhile, this newly attempted first aid was useful to them. He gave the fire a final poke and then paused, wondering if, when heated, his screwdriver could make an unfastened end of wire stick on the grayish spot where it seemed to belong. Stretching prone to blow the embers hot so he could try out his new idea, Roddy got too close to the flames. Instantly the room filled with a stench of singed hair. Roddy drew angrily back, beating out the sparks in his uncut blonde mane. As he stood slapping his head and muttering, a deranged civil defense firefighter popped into the doorway and covered him with carbon dioxide foam. Roddy fled. His lifelong friends were not merely wearing out, they were unbearably wearing. In the street, even before he'd wiped off the foam, he regretted his flight. The fire was back home, and here in the cold of this fog-shrouded canyon, a mere trail between heaped-up walls of rubble. The diaper he wore felt inadequate against the pre-dawn cold. His cherished weapon, a magnetic tack hammer, was chill beneath the diaper's top, and the broken radium-dialed wristwatch, suspended from a string around his neck, hung clammy against his chest. He stood, irresolute, on numbing bare feet, and considered returning to the more familiar bedlam. But colder than cold was his shame at being cold. Molly never was, though she knew how to keep him warm. Nor were the others. Hunger, thirst, pain, and coldness were sensations never experienced by his friends. Like the growth he'd been undergoing till recently, these were things of ignominy, to be hidden as far as possible from inquiring eyes. Cold as it was, he'd have to hide. Temporarily, the darkness concealed him, though it was not quite complete. From above the fog, the moon played vaguely deceptive light on the splinters of architecture looming toward it. Some distance off, an owl hooted, but here nocturnal rodents felt free to squeak and rustle as they scampered. The world seemed ghostly, yet it wasn't dead. It merely lurked. And as an irrepressible yawn reminded Roddy of his absurd need for sleep, even in the midst of danger, he concluded for the 1000th time that the one who'd built him must have been an apprentice. For just such reasons he'd developed the hideout toward which he now walked. It had been the haven of his adolescence, when the discovery of how much he differed from his friends had been a shock, and the shock itself a difference to be hidden. His hiding place was a manhole, dead center in the dead street. A weathered bronze bar, carefully placed in the cover's slotted rim, was the levering key that opened its door. Everything was wrong tonight. He couldn't even find the bar. Of course, that spoiled things, because the bar was a roller on which to move the heavy cover from below, and a support that held it ajar for ventilation. But the example of his friends had taught him above all else to carry out every purpose. Molly was a nurse. She had raised him despite all obstacles. The soldiers were guards. They protected the ruins against everything larger than a rat. The firefighter had put even him out when he was aflame. Anyhow, the manhole cover had been loosened by his frequent handling. He lifted it aside by main strength, then flattened himself to the street and felt with his feet for the top rung. Halfway down the iron ladder, something made him pause. He looked, but saw only blackness. He listened, sniffed, found nothing. What could have entered through the iron cover? He sneered at his own timidity and jumped to the bottom. It was warm. The dry bottom of the hole had the temperature of body heat, as if a large animal had recently rested there. Quickly, Roddy drew the hammer from his waist. Then, with weapon ready for an instantaneous blow, he stretched his left hand through the darkness. He touched something warm, softish. Gingerly, he felt over that curving surface for identifying features. While Roddy investigated by touch, his long fingers were suddenly seized and bitten. At the same time, his right shin received a savage kick, and his own retaliatory blow was checked in mid-swing by an unexpected voice. "Get your filthy hands off me!" it whispered angrily. "Who do you think you are?" Startled, he dropped his hammer. "I'm Roddy," he said, squatting to fumble for it. "Who do you think you are?" "I'm Ida, naturally. Just how many girls are there in this raiding party?" His first invader, and he had dropped his weapon. Scrabbling fearfully in the dust for his hammer, Roddy paused suddenly. This girl, whatever that was, seemed to think him one of her own kind. There was a chance, not much, but worth taking, to turn delay to advantage. Maybe he could learn something of value before he killed her. That would make the soldiers accept him. He stalled, seeking a gambit. How would I know how many girls there are? Half expecting a blow, he got instead an apology. "I'm sorry," the girl said. "I should have known. Never even heard your name before, either. Roddy. Whose boat did you come in, Roddy?" "Boat? What was a boat? How would I know?" he repeated, voice tight with fear of discovery. If she noticed the tension, she didn't show it. Certainly her whisper was friendly enough. "Oh, you're one of the fellows from Bodega, then. They shoved a boy into our boat at the last minute, too. Tough, wasn't it, getting separated in the fog and tied like that? If only we didn't have to use boats. But say, how are we going to get away from here?" "I wouldn't know," Roddy said, closing his fingers on the hammer and rising. "How did you get in?" "Followed your footprints. It was sundown, and I saw human tracks in the dust, and they led me here. Where were you?" "Scouting around," Roddy said vaguely. "How did you know I was a man when I came back?" "Because you couldn't see me, silly. You know perfectly well these androids are heat sensitive and can locate us in the dark." Indeed, he did know. Many times he'd felt ashamed that Molly could find him whenever she wanted to, even here in the manhole. But perhaps the manhole would help him now to redeem himself. "I'd like to get a look at you," he said. The girl laughed self-consciously. "It's getting gray out. You'll see me soon enough." But she'd see him, Roddy realized. He had to talk fast. "What'll we do when it's light?" he asked. "Well, I guess the boats have gone," Ida said. "You could swim the gate, I guess. You seem tall and strong enough, but I couldn't. You'll think it's crazy, but I've given this some thought, and even looked it over from the other side. I expect to try the Golden Gate Bridge." Now he was getting somewhere. The bridge was ruined, impassable. Even her own people had crossed the strait by other means. But if there were a way over the bridge— "It's broken," he said. "How in the world can we cross it?" "Oh, you'll find out if you take me up there. I don't want to be alone, Roddy. Will you go with me, now?" Well, she could be made to point out the route before he killed her, if nothing happened when she saw him. Uneasy, Roddy hefted the hammer in his hand. A giggle broke the pause. "It's nice of you to wait and let me go first up the ladder," the girl said. "But where the heck is the rusty old thing?" "I'll go first," said Roddy. He might need the advantage. "The ladder's right behind me." He climbed with hammer in teeth and stretched his left hand from street level to grasp and neutralize the girl's right. Then, nervously fingering his weapon, he stared at her in the thin gray dawn. She was short and lean, except for roundnesses here and there. From her shapeless doeskin dress stretched slender legs that tapered to feet that were bare, tiny, and like her hands, only 2 in number. Roddy was pleased. They were evenly matched as to members, and that would make things easy when the time came. He looked into her face. It smiled at him, tanned and ruddy, with a full mouth and bright dark eyes that hid under long lashes when he looked too long. Startling, those wary eyes, concealing. For a moment he felt a rush of fear, but she gave his hand a squeeze before twisting loose and burst into sudden laughter. "Diapers!" she chortled, struggling to keep her voice low. "My big, strong, blonde and blue-eyed hero goes into battle wearing diapers and carrying only a hammer to fight with. You're the most unforgettable character I have ever known." He'd passed inspection, then. So far. He expelled his withheld breath and said, "I think you'll find me a little odd, in some ways." "Oh, not at all," Ida replied quickly. "Different, yes, but I wouldn't say odd." When they started down the street, she was nervous, despite Roddy's assertion that he knew where the soldiers were posted. He wondered if she felt some of the doubt he'd tried to conceal, shared his visions of what the soldiers might do if they found him brazenly strolling with an invader. They might not believe he was only questioning a prisoner. Every day his friends were becoming more unpredictable. For that very reason, because he didn't know what precautions would do any good, he took a chance and walked openly to the bridge by the most direct route. In time, this apparent assurance stilled Ida's fears, and she began to talk. Many of the things she said were beyond his experience and meaningless to him, but he did note with interest how effective the soldiers had been. "It's awful," Ida said. "So few young men are left, so many casualties." "But why do we, keep up the fight?" Roddy asked. "I mean, the soldiers will never leave the city. Their purpose is to guard it, and they can't leave, so they won't attack. Let them alone, and there'll be plenty of young men." "Well," said Ida sharply, "you need indoctrination. Didn't they ever tell you that the city is our home, even if the stupid androids do keep us out? Don't you know how dependent we are on these raids for all our tools and things?" She sounded suspicious. Roddy shot her a furtive, startled glance, but she wasn't standing off to fight him. On the contrary, she was too close for both comfort and combat. She bumped him hip and shoulder every few steps, and if he edged away, she followed. He went on with his questioning. "Why are you here? I mean, sure, the others are after tools and things, but what's your purpose?" Ida shrugged. "I'll admit no girl has ever done it before," she said, "but I thought I could help with the wounded. That's why I have no weapon." She hesitated, glanced covertly up at him, and went on with a rush of words. "It's the lack of men, I guess. All the girls are kind of bored and hopeless, so I got this bright idea and stowed away on one of the boats when it was dark and the fog had settled down. Do you think I was being silly?" "No, but you do seem a little purposeless." In silence they trudged through a vast area of charred wood and concrete foundations on the northern end of the city. Thick fog over the water hid Alcatraz, but inshore visibility was better, and they could see the beginning of the bridge approach. A stone rattled nearby. There was a clink of metal. Ida gasped and clung to Roddy's arm. "Behind me," he whispered urgently. "Get behind me and hold on." He felt Ida's arms encircling his waist, her chin digging into his back below the left shoulder. Facing them, 100 feet away, stood a soldier. He looked contemptuous, hostile. "It's all right," Roddy said, his voice breaking. There was a long, sullen, heart-stopping stare. Then the soldier turned and walked away. Ida's grip loosened, and he could feel her sag behind him. Roddy turned and held her. With eyes closed, she pressed cold blue lips to his. He grimaced and turned away his head. Ida's response was quick. "Forgive me," she breathed, and slipped from his arms, but she held herself erect. "I was so scared, and then we've had no sleep, no food or water." Roddy was familiar with these signs of weakness, proud of appearing to deny his own humiliating needs. "I guess you're not as strong as me," he said smugly. "I'll take care of you. Of course we can't sleep now, but I'll get food and water." Leaving her to follow, he turned left to the ruins of a supermarket he had previously visited, demonstrating his superior strength by setting a pace Ida couldn't match. By the time she caught up with him, he had grubbed out a few cans of the special size that Molly always chose. Picking two that were neither dented, swollen, nor rusted, he smashed an end of each with his hammer and gave Ida her choice of strained spinach or squash. "Baby food," she muttered. "Maybe it's just what we need. But to eat baby food with a man wearing a diaper! Tell me, Roddy, how did you happen to know where to find it?" "Well, this is the northern end of the city," he answered, shrugging. "I've been here before." "Why did the soldier let us go?" "This watch," he said, touching the radium dial. "It's a talisman." But Ida's eyes had widened, and the color was gone from her face. She was silent, too, except when asking him to fill his fast emptied can with rainwater. She didn't finish her own portion, but lay back in the rubble with feet higher than her head, obviously trying to renew her strength. And when they resumed their walk, her sullen, fear-clouded face showed plainly that he'd given himself away. But to kill her now, before learning how she planned to cross the supposedly impassable bridge, seemed as purposeless and impulsive as Ida herself. Roddy didn't think, in any case, that her death would satisfy the soldiers. With new and useful information to offer, he might join them as an equal at last. But if his dalliance with this enemy seemed pointless, not even Molly's knitting needles could protect him. He was sure the soldiers must be tracking the mysterious emanations of his watch dial, and had trouble to keep from glancing over his shoulder at every step. But arrival at the bridge approach ended the need for this self-restraint. Here, difficult going demanded full attention. He'd never gone as far as the bridge before, not having wanted to look as if he might be leaving the city. The approach was a jungle of concrete, with an underbrush of reinforcing steel that reached for the unwary with rusted spines. Frequently they had to balance on cracked girders and inch over roadless spots high off the ground. Here Ida took the lead. When they got to where 3 approach roads made a cloverleaf, she led him down a side road and into a forest. Roddy stopped and seized her arm. "What are you trying to do?" he demanded. "I'm taking you with me," Ida said firmly, "taking you where you belong." "No," he blurted, drawing his hammer. "I can't go, nor let you go. I belong here." Ida gasped, twisted loose, and ran. Roddy ran after her. She wasn't so easily caught. Like a frightened doe, she dashed in and out among the trees, leapt to the bridge's underpinnings, where they thrust rustically from a cliff, and scrambled up the ramp. Roddy sighed and slowed down. The pavement ended just beyond the cable anchors. From there to the south tower, only an occasional dangling support wire showed where the actual bridge had been suspended. Ida was trapped. He could take his time, let the soldiers come up, as they undoubtedly would, to finish the job. But Ida didn't seem to realize she was trapped. Without hesitation, she dashed up the main left-hand suspension cable and ran along its curved steel surface. For a moment, Roddy thought of letting her go, letting her run up the ever-deepening catenary until, because there were no guard ropes or hand grips, she simply fell. That would solve his problem. Except it wouldn't be his solution. Her death wouldn't prove him to his friends. He set out quickly, before Ida was lost to sight in the thick fog that billowed in straight from the ocean. At first he ran erect along the top of the yard-wide cylinder of twisted metal, but soon the curve steepened. He had to go on all fours, clinging palm and sole. Blood was on the cable where she'd passed. More blood stained it when he'd followed. But because his friends knew neither pain nor fatigue, Roddy would admit none either. Nor would he give in to the fear that dizzled him at every downward look. He scrambled on like an automaton, watching only his holds, till he rammed Ida's rear with his head. She had stopped, trembling and gasping. Roddy clung just below her and looked dazedly around. There was nothing in sight but fog, pierced by the rapier of rusted wire supporting them. Neither end of it was in sight. Upward lay success, if death were not nearer on the cable. No soldier had ever come even this far, for soldiers, as he told Ida, never left the city, were not built to do so. But he was here. With luck, he could capitalize on the differences that had plagued him so long. "Go on," he ordered hoarsely. "Move." There was neither answer nor result. He broke off an end of the loosened wire and jabbed her rear. Ida gasped and crawled on. Up and up they went, chilled, wet, bleeding, pain-racked, exhausted. Never had Roddy felt so thoroughly the defects of his peculiar, non-mechanical construction. Without realizing it, he acquired a new purpose, a duty as compelling as that of any soldier or fire-watcher. He had to keep that trembling body of his alive, mount to the tall rust tower overhead. He climbed, and he made Ida climb, till, at nightmare's end, the fog thinned, and they came into clear, wind-swept air, and clawed up the last 100 feet to sanctuary. They were completely spent. Without word or thought, they crept within the tower, huddled together for warmth on its dank steel deck, and slept for several hours. Roddy awoke as Ida finished struggling free of his unconscious grip. Limping, he joined her painful walk around the tower. From its openings they looked out on a strange and isolated world. To the north, where Ida seemed drawn as though by instinct, Mount Tamalpais reared its brushy head, a looming island above a billowy white sea of fog. To the south were the Twin Peaks, a pair of buttons on a cotton sheet. Eastward lay Mount Diablo, bald and brooding, tallest of the peaks and most forbidding. But westward over the ocean lay the land of gold, of all the kinds of gold there are, from brightest yellow to deepest orange. Only a small portion of the setting sun glared above the fog bank. The rest seemed to have been broken off and smeared around by a child in love with its color. Fascinated, Roddy stared for minutes, but turned when Ida showed no interest. She was intent on the tower itself. Following her eyes, Roddy saw his duty made suddenly clear. Easy to make out, even in the fading light, was the route by which invaders could cross to the foot of this tower, on the remaining ruins of the road, climb to where he now stood, and then descend the cable over the bridge's gap and catch the city unaware. Easy to estimate was the advantage of even this perilous route over things that scattered on the water and prevented a landing in strength. Easy to see was the need to kill Ida before she carried home this knowledge. Roddy took the hammer from his waist. "Don't! Oh, don't!" Ida screamed. She burst into tears and covered her face with scratched and bloodied hands. Surprised, Roddy withheld the blow. He had wept as a child, and weeping had for the first time learned he differed from his friends. Ida's tears disturbed him, bringing unhappy memories. "Why should you cry?" he asked comfortingly. "You know your people will come back to avenge you and will destroy my friends." But my people are your people too," Ida wailed. "It's so senseless. Now, after all our struggle to escape, don't you see? Your friends are only machines, built by our ancestors. We are men, and the city is ours, not theirs." "It can't be," Roddy objected. "The city surely belongs to those who are superior, and my friends are superior to your people, even to me. Each of us has a purpose, though, while you invaders seem to be aimless. Each of us helps preserve the city. You only try to rob and end it by destroying it. My people must be the true men, because they are so much more rational than yours, and it isn't rational to let you escape." Ida had turned up her tear-streaked face to stare at him. "Rational? What's rational about murdering a defenseless girl in cold blood? Don't you realize we're the same sort of being, we two? Don't you remember how we've been with each other all day?" She paused. Roddy noticed that her eyes were dark and frightened. yet somehow soft, over scarlet cheeks. He had to look away, but he said nothing. "Never mind," Ida said viciously. "You can't make me beg. Go ahead and kill. See if it proves you're superior. My people will take over the city regardless of you and me, and regardless of your jumping jack friends, too. Men can accomplish anything." Scornfully, she turned and looked toward the western twilight. It was Roddy's turn to stand and stare. "Purpose," Ida flung at him over her shoulder. "Logic. Women hear so much of that from men. You're a man, all right. Men always call it logic when they want to destroy. Loyalty to your own sort. Kindness, affection, all emotional, aren't they? Not a bit logical. Emotion is for creating, and it's so much more logical to destroy, isn't it?" She whirled back toward him, advancing as if she wanted to sink her teeth into his throat. "Go ahead, get it over with, if you have the courage." It was hard for Roddy to look away from that crimson face, but it was even harder to keep staring into the blaze of her eyes. He compromised by gazing out an opening at the gathering dusk. He thought for a long time before he decided to tuck his hammer away. "It isn't reasonable to kill you now," he said. "Too dark. You can't possibly get down that half-ruined manway tonight, so let's see how I feel in the morning." Ida began to weep again, and Roddy found it necessary to comfort her. And by morning he knew he was a man. End of Bridge Crossing by Dave Dreyfuss.
Dead End by Wallace McFarlane. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Amato. Dead End by Wallace McFarlane. Scientist William Manning Norris drank his soup meticulously and scooped up the vegetables at the bottom of the cup, while his attention was focused on the television screen. He watched girls swimming in formation as he gnawed the bone of his steak. He stolidly ate the baked potato with his fingers when the girls turned around, displaying "Ouija's are best" signs pasted to their shapely backs. The final flourish was more formation swimming, where they formed a wheel underwater, swimming past the camera to display in individual letters stuck to their bare midriffs, "Wonderful Ouija's." Norcross chuckled appreciatively when a fat old man swam after them with an "Is that right?" strung across his behind. Young men followed him, each carrying a one-word card that spelled, "You bet it's right, don't be left, by Ouija's." The scene ended on the surface. The grotesque old man was far and back, while the young men caught the young women, and together they kicked up a cloud of spray in the distance, which by a trick of photography mounted the sky, and the words swept across the globe in monstrous letters, "By Ouija's." The dessert was apple pie, and Scientist Norcross turned the screen to the Abstractions channel. Watching the colors and patterns form in response to the music, he finished the pie and licked his fingers appreciatively. He pressed a stud to reveal the mirror wall before he activated the molecular cleanup. Not many people would do that. It was not contrary to morals exactly, but it was like scratching in public, and it took a scientific mind to study the human form unshaken, immediately after digestion. There was pie on his tunic, and gravy in his hair, and a smear of grease from cheek to ear. With no sign of squeamishness, he smeared beet juice on his nose, and studied the effect before he depressed the clear stud. He stretched and stood up while the tray disappeared, then turned and glanced in the mirror again. Nothing on him. Clean. He yawned luxuriantly before he tapped the finish panel on the door and stepped forth, an immaculate and well-fed gentleman of the year 2512. He had a well-trained sense of humor, and a smile crossed his lips as he thought of the terror a 21st-century man would feel in such an eating chamber. When he pressed the clear button, the barbarian would be clean, really sterilely clean, for the first time in his life, and without clothes, too. Oh, what a jape that would be, for the molecular cleanup would immediately disintegrate such abominations, as the fur of animals, and much clothing 400 years ago, was actually made of such things as sheep hair. He bowed to a pretty woman just entering a cubicle, and thought defiantly that a scientific mind afforded much amusement. There was no illusion in his icy clear thoughts, for they were not befogged by moral questions. With a sigh, scientist William Manning Norcross returned to the difficult problem he had set aside while having lunch. The garden was beautiful outside, but he gave only passing attention to the rain slithering down the huge dome of force over the buildings. He did not pause to admire the everlasting flowers in their carefully simulated beds of soil. John Davis Drumstetter was in a state of crisis again, and Scientist Norcross was worried. His fears were well-founded. The young man wheeled on Scientist Norcross the minute he stepped through the hedge into the force field under the giant live oak tree. "Where are they?" he demanded. "I'm coming to believe, scientist, that your reputation is exceeded only by your inability to live up to it. The problem is only an extension of your own early work. You volunteered cooperation, and I accepted it gladly, but your delays are very distressing." "Johnny," said Scientist Norcross, "the press of my own experiments." "Then tell me you won't do it." "I want to help you. Don't you remember the years we spent together in your training to the high calling of scientist? I took your young hand, Johnny, and helped you over the juvenile stumbling blocks. Why, your first mind machine was one I gave you, and when— "You're a fraud, scientist," said the young man bitterly. "The young never appreciate the old," sighed Norcross. "Go suck a mango." Norcross was shocked. "There's no call for being obscene, John Davis Drumstetter," he said sternly. "To mention eating to another person, and right in public, where you might be overheard— Eat a slippery, sloppery mango on television, you old fool! Smear it all over your face while you ingest it into your unspeakable digestive tract." "John Davis Drumstetter," said the scientist with great control, "I have been your friend since you were born. Your father and I became scientists on the same day. You are young and overeager. Just remember," he finished with a warning shake of his finger, "Satellite Station 1 wasn't built in a day." Drumstetter stopped his furious pacing and subdued his rage with visible effort. He chilled, like red steel hardening, and when he spoke, he was in full command of himself. "Now listen to me, Norcross, and keep your mouth shut. For the past 40 years, I've been working on the stellar overdrive. We have the solar system in our reticule, colonies have been established on every planet, and ships have been sent to Alpha Centauri, with every chance that mankind has established itself in that solar system. But in the 400 years since science has emerged from the Dark Ages, we've managed to creep only 4 light-years away from home. And you, scientist, are withholding your work on the overdrive relay. Do you understand why your plea of old friendship does not affect me? In the past 2 years, you've done nothing— "Experiments that must be kept secret," mumbled Norcross. "And it is my belief," said the young man in a clipped, cold voice, "that you have sold yourself to your taste buds and digestive tract. Either that," and here his burning rage came into the open, "or you are a pseudo-life." At this ultimate insult, Scientist Norcross was silent with indignation. He watched Drumstetter shrug into a stole, turn down the power to the huge mind machine, sling his reticule over his shoulder, and stalk off through the hedge. Norcross slumped into a chair, his mind in confusion. He heard Drumstetter's plane as it left the ground. Plane, he thought, his mind avoiding the problem. Plane. What a curious name, handed down through the ages, to call a swift skip powered by Earth's magnetism. An original plane fought the air, buoyed up by the lift of plane surfaces in movement. When the movement stopped, it died. Died. Death. Pseudolife. Scientist Norcross shuddered. His well-trained sense of humor did not include abominations. He took the communication from his pocket and cleared to Prime Center. When the prim, grim face of Prime Center himself in the little disc was sharp, Norcross reported what had happened, even to the suggestion Drumstetter had made that he was pseudo-life. "This is very bad," said Prime Center. "Monica Drake Lane is now pseudo-life too. God's name. Took her skiff into a cliff in the Sierra Mountains yesterday. Disconnected the anti-collision. A clear case. What will this do to Drumstetter?" "Nothing," said Prime Center. "Unless he learns." "Is she ready?" "I'm sending her to you right now for indoctrination. Reports are that Drumstetter is visiting scientists on the West Coast, and probability reports that he may cover the world before he returns. Do you understand? Her indoctrination must be perfect. It always has been. Norcross pulled his lip. The same limitation will be in Monica Drake Lane? He asked hopelessly. Of course, said Prime Center. We'll keep you posted on developments. You'd better try women, said Norcross. Women, narcotics, or anything else. I'd eat a blueberry pie with my hands behind my back at high noon, said Prime Center with fierce obscenity, if I thought it would do any good. He cut the connection. Norcross was still under the oak tree, lost in contemplation of a color abstraction on his little communication, when a tall blonde girl, brown as a berry, stepped hesitantly through the hedge. She walked to him, and, when he looked up, she buried her face in her hands. He stood and held her shoulders. Now, said Scientist Norcross. Don't cry, my dear. But this is so puzzling. And I wasn't crying, she answered. What's happened to me? Sit down, Monica, and tell me what you think has happened. But I don't know. You see, the last thing I remember is walking through the psych lab in San Francisco, and suddenly I'm in New York, and they're sending me to you. What has happened? Where do you first remember being in New York? Oh, I don't know. She was in a flush of embarrassment. I'll help you, my dear. You were in the pseudo-life clinic. You're not exactly Monica Drake Lane anymore. She died. You are pseudo-life. Her eyes were bright, and the pupils were pinpointed from shock. You are the pseudo-life Monica Drake Lane. To all outward appearances, you are an exact counterpart of the girl. Inwardly? Well, your internal organs have been simplified, and you cannot reproduce. Aside from such minor changes, you are identical, and incidentally, a much more efficient creature than your prototype. And if your mind, which is a very good one, was a human mind, I could not tell you this. Pseudolife is a most remarkable thing, but Lewis and Havinghurst and Cobalt, who developed it 300 years ago, were never able to imbue pseudolife with what they called the -1 factor, which includes the phenomenal human emotional sensitivity, among other things. Are you feeling better now? Why, yes. Her voice trailed off. You are no longer a slave to your emotions, said Scientist Norcross, complacently. None of us are. You are... Oh, yes. We generally don't speak of such things, but since I'm to introduce you to pseudolife, I can tell you that I died 2 years ago. I'm afraid I never did know, or Monica Drake Lane never... That is, You are Monica Drake Lane. If you will sit quietly, I'll tell you about it. Scientist Norcross took 2 cigarettes from his reticule and offered the girl one. The lip play was considered somewhat daring between the sexes, but under the circumstances, he thought the mild narcotic would be good for her, as well as the sharpening of the senses brought on by actually smoking together. When the Americans, who inhabited this continent, gained domination of the world in the 21st century, they consolidated their position by carrying their customs to the ends of the earth. For that matter, to Alpha Centauri, if the ships did get through. Forgive me, he interrupted himself, if I seem improper or even immoral in this little talk of ours. Believe me, it's not with an easy disregard to proprieties that I bring myself to speak of such things. Well, the Americans believed, and rightly so, that death is a dreadful thing. Until Lewis and Havinghurst and Cobalt developed pseudolife, a great deal of time and effort and money went into such things as cemeteries, places where they literally buried their dead with elaborate ceremonials and much anguish. They had other equally wasteful practices, such as madhouses and jails, which were done away with when it became practical to replace a useless person with another, who matched the original to near absolute perfection, but without fatal flaws of body or weaknesses of the mind. Emphasis was shifted since those early years, when the abnormals were dealt with, to the comforting of human beings. Should John Davis Drumstetter suffer greatly at the loss of his mentor, the man who guided him in the ways of science? Of course not. He never knew I died. Norcross puffed complacently, sending iridescent rainbow smoke rings over the mind machine. And I am his fiancée, said the girl. Should he suffer because you died? No reason for it, said Norcross heartily. A psychic trauma of that nature would make him desperately unhappy. Happiness is the proper state in life, as everyone knows. In fact, you will make him much happier than Monica Drake Lane, the original, ever could. Yes, I shall be happy, mused the girl, as if feeling a more limited capacity for sorrow within herself. But you spoke of a -1 factor. Yes, it takes in a lot of things. Though we are immortal, barring accidents, and we retain all the knowledge we had as human beings, the flaw to pseudo-life is that no original thought is possible. Students of the matter compare it to glancing at a page in a dictionary. Of course, you don't consciously remember the words there, but in pseudo-life, you're capable of remembering and using them properly, so to speak, but not using them creatively. That is our trouble with John Davis Drumstetter. I was a brilliant physicist, but the understanding of new problems is beyond my limitations, and he is beyond me. But I woke in New York, she said irrelevantly. Because your master's pseudo-life file was kept there, explained Scientist Norcross. As a human being, you were required to visit the psych lab every month, where your change pattern was recorded by the mind machine. The pseudo-life girl could never lose more than a month of the human being's life. What was your regular appointment date? The 21st. Let's see. You died yesterday, so there would be only 3 days gone. We're very fortunate. But won't he notice a difference in me? Absolutely not. Am I still capable of love? Scientist Norcross blew a plume of rainbow smoke into the air. Suppose, my dear, we find out. Monica Drake Lane agreed, for morality, which is essentially organized taboo that changes as society changes, had, in the 26th century, been confirmed exclusively to eating. Scientist Norcross had often amused himself by imagining how people of other ages would have been outraged by the moral standards of his own era. But his famous sense of humor was not rugged enough to be amused by the moral standards of the past. Not, at any rate, if he had had to endure them, though he found them sufficiently comic as history. She built a bower, an attractive courtship custom that had been adopted from the birds, and the day ended much more pleasantly than Scientist Norcross had expected at lunch. The reports came in from Prime Center. Drumstetter stayed in Los Angeles 2 days, in San Francisco 3, and then consulted with Dowson in Honolulu. He skipped to New Zealand, back north to Japan, and swung across Siberia, with short stops at various laboratories and universities. He was in Finland for 3 days, with old scientist Theophil Gertzley, who, though little better than a witch doctor, called himself a psychologist. He greeted Scientist Norcross and his fiancée with an offhandedness that Norcross had not expected, and asked that he be excused from any long immediate association with them, due to the press of uncompleted work. But Johnny, said Monica Drake Lane, I've made a bower close by, and you seem very tired. There's work to be done, said the young man firmly. I have no time to— Wait, I'll see your bower. As they walked over the lush, artificial grass, Scientist Norcross explained that his results from the overdrive relay equations were in the mind machine even now, but John Davis Drumstetter only patted him on the shoulder in a friendly way, and told him not to bother. When they reached the bower, Scientist Norcross expected that Drumstetter would sleep there after all, for it was an exceptionally pleasant design. The force field was night, and the sky was filled with adapted creatures from Mars, dancing to their susurrate music, and the air was permeated with the bittersweet and exciting scent of a Venusian lake, the very odor of romance. In the background was the song of the sea. John Davis Drumstetter stepped out of the bower and said gently, It's one of the nicest I've ever seen, and we spent some happy nights in it a year ago, didn't we, Monica? He kissed her gently, as he might kiss a child, and walked back to the oak tree. He's behaving very oddly, reported Norcross to Prime Center, as soon as he could, and gave the details. I'd give a lot to have him meet a human female, said Prime Center wistfully. What shall I do? Stay with him and wait, ordered Prime Center. This is the first time the hopes of humanity lie in one man. Remember that. We can only serve, he added bitterly. He hasn't tested the final limitation? Good. Keep me informed. John Davis Drumstetter stayed beside his huge mind machine for nearly a week, and, though he was only 60, he looked like an old man when he greeted Monica and Norcross at the end of that time. The relay is finished, he announced. It's being installed in the Last Hope now. That's what I'm calling my ship. The ship to make mankind free of the stars. My work on Earth is nearly done. But Johnny darling, said Monica Drake Lane, looking up at him through her eyelashes, what about our marriage? He looked at her with grim pity. The bower was an old bower, he answered. Did you have the courage to be a unique in a patterned world? Can you reproduce Monica Drake Lane? Oh, Johnny. The final limitation, he said. Humans have the power to command pseudolife. Pseudolife, answer. I command. She sank to the ground. No, she said. No, Johnny, I can't have a baby. I died over a month ago. I'm sorry you found out. John Davis Drumstetter turned on scientist William Manning Norcross. You've done no new work because you have no capacity for it, correct? Answer, pseudolife. I command. Norcross lifted a calm face. Why, yes, he said. I'm pseudolife. Have been for over 2 years. But don't you worry, Johnny. It's better this way, and only natural that... John Davis Drumstetter paid no attention. He spoke as if explaining to himself. You see, there's pseudolife, dancing to the very end of the masquerade ball that started so long ago. It began when measurable science, the science of finity, made a finite man, a man nearly as good. It was the mental climate of an age that wanted its books digested and then abandoned reading for television. They froze food and pre-cooked it, and said it was even better than garden-fresh vegetables. Do it the easy way, they said, never knowing that the hard way is the only way in the last analysis. Why try and cure a neurotic when you can make a pseudolife of him? Don't let his grieving friends or relations suffer. Provide them with a pseudolife. He's just the same, they said, and he's not sick. And should a man die? Oh no, make a pseudolife for his wife and children. But Johnny, be still, pseudolife. Why bother with men who are beginning to understand the human mind, when you can create pseudolife? The cheap drives out the good every time. Oh, with the kindliest intentions, with the softest sympathies, hide, conceal, the truth be damned. But Johnny, darling, began Monica Drake Lane. Be still, pseudolife. There's one more thing, the final capstone to mankind's pyramid of folly. He got Prime Center on the communication. Answer, pseudolife, I command. Am I the last human being on Earth? Since you put it that way, said Prime Center reluctantly, you are. And in the solar system? I'm afraid so. The communication dropped from John Davis Drumstetter's hand. This is the logical conclusion, he said slowly. The actors are playing on a stage of worlds for an audience of one. At the Solar Observatory on Mercury, astronomers study the sun and send in their reports, in case I should glance at them. Miners dig ore to provide a market quotation I might see in the telepapers. He kicked the communication across the floor. Get out, he told them with infinite weariness. The last human being commands. He slept for a day and had breakfast in full public view under a tree. Peeping Toms of both sexes watched him. Prime Center appeared in person just as he finished mopping up the last of his once-over-lightly egg. Prime Center coughed and blushed and looked away, and John Davis Drumstetter laughed out loud, humorlessly. Good morning, he said cheerfully. Yes, said Prime Center. Sit down. Have an egg? A wicked light appeared in his eyes, and he went on in a low, sinister voice. A coddled egg, soft and white and runny. Maybe you want to gulp some coffee, or snap your way through a piece of crackling toast. No? His guest was turning pale and sick-looking. Well, let me finish this bacon, and state your business. He threw back his head and slipped the bacon into his mouth. Prime Center shuddered. Scientist Drumstetter, he said, keeping his gaze fixed on the trunk of the tree. I have come to offer you all the worlds. Yes, the whole solar system, including the asteroids and Pluto. You will be more powerful than Alexander, or Caesar, or Stalin, or O'Toole. We will create a new office, Prime Squared Center, to rule the solar system. Do you mind not doing that? John Davis Drumstetter was licking his fingers thoughtfully. He nodded. Then you accept? No, I'm through licking my fingers. I'll give you your answer on a system-wide communication. Arrange it, pseudolife, immediately. As a concession to morality, John Davis Drumstetter agreed to step into a molecular cleanup booth. When he came out again, he spoke to the worlds and all the ships in space. My friends, from now on, the blind will lead the blind. Moral obliquity has triumphed and becomes common morality. He laughed and rubbed his nose. I'm sorry. I was speaking to an audience of one. Myself. What I want you billions to do is to continue your work, to maintain the system as it now stands. Pseudolife will be replaced by pseudolife till the end of time. It will be a static world. It will be a nearly as good world. It will be a pleasant world by your standards. I wish you to do this, and you must, of course, obey my command. My purpose reaches a little beyond your natural inclination. This system will serve as a fertile warning to any beings with intelligence who may come after me. I will not be with you long, myself. Suicide? Asked Prime Center, hopefully. Alpha Centauri, said John Davis Drumstetter with a chuckle. The colonists left because they didn't like pseudolife either. Goodbye to you all. He snapped off the communication, waved to the little group under the tree, and entered the last hope. The entry port swung closed. The force field glowed, and then the ship was gone, leaving behind a whirlwind of dust. Alpha Centauri? Asked Monica Drake Lane. Following the others of his wild, unstable breed, said Scientist Norcross. Easy come, easy go, the girl said, shrugging. Prime Center had the last word. Yes, and good riddance. Human beings have always been a nuisance. Dead End by Wallace McFarlane.
Doctor by Murray Leinster. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Loving. Suddenly, the biggest thing in the universe was the very tiniest. There were suns which were nearby, and there were stars which were so far away that no way of telling their distance had any meaning. The suns and planets, most of which didn't matter, but the ones that did count had seas and continents, and the continents had cities and highways and spaceports and people. The people paid no attention to their insignificance. They built ships which went through the emptiness beyond imagining, and they landed upon planets and rebuilt them to their own liking. Suns flamed terribly, renting their impertinence, and storms swept across the planets they preempted, but the people built more strongly and were secure. Everything in the universe was bigger or stronger than the people, but they ignored the fact. They went about the businesses they had contrived for themselves. They were not afraid of anything until somewhere on a certain small planet, an infinitesimal single molecule changed itself. It was one molecule among unthinkably many, upon one planet of one solar system among uncountable star clusters. It was not exactly alive, but it acted as if it were, in which it was like all the important matter of the cosmos. It was actually a combination of two complicated substances not too firmly joined together. When one of the parts changed, it became a new molecule, but, like the original one, it was still capable of a process called autocatalysis. It practiced that process and catalyzed other molecules into existence, which in each case were duplicates of itself. Then mankind had to take notice, though it ignored the flaming suns and monstrous storms and emptiness past belief. Men called the new molecule a virus and gave it a name. They called it and its duplicates chlorophages, and chlorophages was, to people, the most terrifying thing in the universe. In a strictly temporary orbit around the planet Altera, the Star Queen floated, while lift ships brought passengers and cargo up to it. The ship was too large to be landed economically at an unimportant spaceport like Altera. It was a very modern ship, and it made the Regulus to Cassim run, which is 500 light years, in only 50 days of Earth time. Now the lift ships were busy. There was an unusual number of passengers to board the Star Queen at Altera, and an unusual number of them were women and children. The children tended to pudginess, and the women had the dieted look of the wives of well-to-do men. Most of them looked red-eyed, as if they'd been crying. One by one, the lift ships hooked onto the airlock of the Star Queen and delivered passengers and cargo to the ship. Presently the last of them was hooked on, and the last batch of passengers came through to the liner, and the ship's doctor watched them stream past him. His air was negligent, but he was actually impatient. Like most doctors, Nordenfeld approved of lean children and wiry women. They had fewer things wrong with them, and they responded better to treatment. While he was the doctor of the Star Queen, and he had much authority, he exerted it back on Regulus to insist that a shipment of botanical specimens for Cassim travel in quarantine. to be exact, in the ship's practically unused hospital compartment, and he was prepared to exercise authority over the passengers. He had a sheaf of health slips from the examiners on the ground below. There was one slip for each passenger. It certified that so-and-so had been examined and could safely be admitted to the Star Queen's air, her 4 restaurants, her 2 swimming pools, her recreation areas, and the 6 levels of passenger cabins the ship contained. He immediately watched the people go by. Health slips or no health slips, he looked them over. A characteristic gait or a typical complexion tint or even a certain lack of hair luster could tell him things that ground physicians might miss. In such a case, the passenger would go back down again. It was not desirable to have deaths on a liner in space. Of course, nobody was ever refused passage because of chlorophage. If it were ever discovered, the discovery would already be too late. But the health regulations for space travel were very, very strict. He looked twice at a young woman as she passed. Despite applied complexion, there was a trace of waxiness in her skin. Nordenfeld had never actually seen a case of chlorophage. No doctor alive ever had. The best authorities were those who'd been in patrol ships during the quarantine of Cameron, when chlorophage was loose on that planet. They'd seen beamed-up pictures of patients, but not patients themselves. The patrol ships stayed in orbit while the planet died. Most doctors, and Nordenfeld was among them, had only seen pictures of the screens which showed the patients. He looked sharply at the young woman. Then he glanced at her hands. They were normal. The young woman went on, unaware that for the fraction of an instant there had been the possibility of the landing of the Star Queen on Altera, and the destruction of her space drive, and the establishment of a quarantine which, if justified, would mean that nobody could ever leave Altera again, but must wait there to die, which would not be a long wait. A fat man puffed past. The gravity in Altera was some 5% under ship normal, and he felt the difference at once. But the veins at his temples were ungorged. Nordenfeld let him go by. There appeared a white-haired, space-tanned man with a briefcase under his arm. He saw Nordenfeld and lifted a hand in greeting. The doctor knew him. He stepped aside for the passengers and stood there. His name was Jensen, and he represented a fund which invested the surplus money of insurance companies. He traveled a great deal to check on the business interests of that organization. The doctor grunted. "What are you doing here? I thought you'd be on the far side of the cluster." "Oh, I get about," said Jensen. His manner was not quite normal. He was tense. "I got here 2 weeks ago on a Q&C tramp from Regulus. We were a shipload of salt meat. There's romance for you. Salt meat by the spaceship load." The doctor grunted again. All sorts of things move through space, naturally. The Star Queen carried a botanical collection for a museum, and pig beryllium, and furs, and enzymes, and a list of items no man could remember. He watched the passengers go by, automatically counting them against the number of health slips in his hand. "Lots of passengers this trip," said Jensen. "Yes," said the doctor, watching a man with a limp. "Why?" Jensen shrugged and did not answer. He was uneasy, the doctor noted. He and Jensen were as much alike as 2 men could very well be, but Jensen was good company. A ship's doctor does not have much congenial society. The file of passengers ended abruptly. There was no one in the Star Queen's airlock, but the connected lights still burned, and the doctor could look through into the small lift ship from the planet down below. He frowned. He fingered the sheaf of papers. "Unless I missed count," he said annoyedly, "there's supposed to be 1 more passenger. I don't see—" A door opened far back in the lift ship. A small figure appeared. It was a little girl, perhaps 10 years old. She was very neatly dressed, though not quite the way a mother would have done it. She wore the carefully composed expression of a child with no adult in charge of her. She walked precisely from the lift ship into the Star Queen's lock. The opening closed briskly behind her. There was the rumbling of seals making themselves tight. The lights flickered for disconnect, then all clear. They went out, and the lift ship had pulled away from the Star Queen. "There's my missing passenger," said the doctor. The child looked soberly about. She saw him. "Excuse me," she said very politely. "Is this the way I'm supposed to go?" "Through the door," said the doctor gruffly. "Thank you," said the little girl. She followed his direction. She vanished through the door. It closed. There came a deep droning sound, which was the interplanetary drive of the Star Queen, building up that directional stress in space which had seemed such a triumph when it was first contrived. The ship swung gently. It would be turning out from orbit around Altera. It swung again. The doctor knew that its astrogators were feeling for the incredibly exact pointing of its nose toward the next port, which modern commercial ship operation required. An error of fractional seconds of arc would mean valuable time lost in making port some 10 light-years of distance away. The drive droned and droned, building up velocity while the ship's aiming was refined and re-refined. The drive cut off abruptly. Jensen turned white. The doctor said impatiently, "There's nothing wrong. Probably a message or a report should have been beamed down to the planet and somebody forgot. We'll go on in a minute." But Jensen stood frozen. He was very pale. The interplanetary drive stayed off. 30 seconds. A minute. Jensen swallowed audibly. 2 minutes. 3. The steady, monotonous drone began again. It continued interminably, as if while off, the ship's head had swung wide off its destination, and the whole business of lining up for a jump in overdrive had to be done all over again. Then there came that ping and the sensation of spiral fall, which meant overdrive. The droning ceased. Jensen breathed again. The ship's doctor looked at him sharply. Jensen had been taut. Now the tensions had left his body, but he looked as if he were going to shiver. Instead, he mopped his suddenly streaming forehead. "I think," said Jensen in a strange voice, "that I'll have a drink, or several. Will you join me?" Nordenfeld searched his face. The ship's doctor had many duties in space. Passengers can have many things wrong with them, and in the absolute isolation of overdrive, they can be remarkably affected by each other. "I'll be at the 4th level bar in 20 minutes, said Nordenfeld. "Can you wait that long?" "I probably won't wait to have a drink," said Jensen, "but I'll be there." The doctor nodded curtly. He went away. He made no guesses, though he just observed the new passengers carefully and was fully aware of the strict health regulations that affect space travel. As a physician, he knew that the most deadly thing in the universe was chlorophagy, and that the planet Cameron was only one star system away. It had been a stop for the Star Queen until 4 years ago. He puzzled over Jensen's tenseness and the relief he'd displayed when the overdrive field came on, but he didn't guess. Chlorophagy didn't enter his mind. Not until later. He saw the little girl who'd come out of the airlock last of all the passengers. She sat on a sofa as if someone had told her to wait there until something or other was arranged. Dr. Nordenfeld barely glanced at her. He'd known Jensen for a considerable time. Jensen had been a passenger on the Star Queen 6 times. He shouldn't have been upset by the temporary stoppage of an interplanetary drive. Nordenfeld divided people into 2 classes, those who were not and those who were worth talking to. There weren't many of the latter. Jensen was. He filed away the health slips. Then, thinking of Jensen's pallor, he asked what had happened to make the Star Queen interrupt her slow-speed drive away from orbit around Altera. The purser told him, but the purser was fussily concerned because there were so many extra passengers from Altera. He might not be able to take on the expected number of passengers at the next stopover point. It would be bad business to have to refuse passengers. It would give the space line a bad name. Then the air officer stopped Nordenfeld as he was about to join Jensen in the 4th level bar. It was time for a medical inspection of the 1/4 acre of Banthian jungle which purified and renewed the air of the ship. Nordenfeld was expected to check the complex ecological system of the air room. Specifically, he was expected to look for and identify any patches of colorlessness appearing on the foliage of the jungle plants the Star Queen carried through space. The air officer was discreet, and Nordenfeld was silent about the ultimate reason for the inspection. Nobody liked to think about it, but if a particular kind of bleaching appeared, as if the chlorophyll of the leaves were being devoured by something too small to be seen by an optical microscope, why, that would be chlorophagy. It would also be a death sentence for the Star Queen and everybody in her. But the jungle passed medical inspection. The plants grew lushly in soil, which periodically was flushed with hydroponic solution, then drained away again. The UV lamps were properly distributed, and the different quarters of the air room were alternately lighted and darkened. And there were no colorless patches. A steady wind blew through the air room and had its excess moisture and unpleasing smells wrung out before it recirculated through the ship. Dr. Nordenfeld authorized the trimming of some liana-like growths which were developing woody tissue at the expense of leaves. The air officer also told him about the reason for the turning off of the interplanetary drive. He considered it a very curious happening. The doctor left the air room and passed the place where the little girl, the last passenger to board the Star Queen, waited patiently for somebody to arrange something. Dr. Nordenfeld took a lift to the 4th level and went into the bar where Jensen should be waiting. He was. He had an empty glass before him. Nordenfeld sat down and dialed for a drink. He had an indefinite feeling that something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. There are always things going wrong for a ship's doctor, though. There are so many demands on his patients that he's usually short of it. Jensen watched him sip at his drink. "A bad day?" he asked. He'd gotten over his own tension. Nordenfeld shrugged, but his scowl deepened. There are a lot of new passengers. He realized that he was trying to explain his feelings to himself. "They'll come to me feeling miserable. I have to tell each one that if they feel heavy and depressed, it may be the gravity constant of the ship, which is greater than their home planet. If they feel lightheaded and giddy, it may be because the gravity constant of the ship is less than they're used to. But it doesn't make them feel better, so they come back for a second assurance. I'll be overwhelmed with such complaints within 2 hours." Jensen waited. Then he said casually, too casually, "Does anybody ever suspect chlorophage?" "No," said Nordenfeld shortly. Jensen fidgeted. He sipped. Then he said, "What's the news from Cameron, anyhow?" "There isn't any," said Nordenfeld. "Naturally, why ask?" "I just wondered," said Jensen, after a moment. "What was the last news?" "There hasn't been a message from Cameron in 2 years," said Nordenfeld curtly. "There's no sign of anything green anywhere on the planet. It's considered to be uninhabited." Jensen licked his lips. "That's what I understood, yes." Nordenfeld drank half his drink and said unpleasantly, "There were 30 million people on Cameron when the chlorophage appeared. At first it was apparently a virus which fed on the chlorophyll of plants. They died. Then it was discovered that it could also feed on hemoglobin, which is chemically close to chlorophyll. Hemoglobin is the red coloring matter of the blood. When the virus consumed it, people began to die. Cameron doctors found that the chlorophage virus was transmitted by contact, by inhalation, by ingestion. It traveled as dust particles in the feet of insects, and it was in the drinking water and the air one breathed. The doctors on Cameron warned spaceships off, and the patrol put a quarantine fleet in orbit around it to keep anybody from leaving. And nobody left, and everybody died. And so did every living thing that had chlorophyll in its leaves, or hemoglobin in its blood, or that needed plant or animal tissues to feed on. There's not a person left alive on Cameron, nor an animal or bird or insect, nor a fish, nor a tree, or a plant, or a weed, or a blade of grass. There's no longer a quarantine fleet there. Nobody'll go there, and there's nobody left to leave. There are beacon satellites to record any calls and to warn any fool against landing. If the chlorophage got loose and was carried about by spaceships, it could kill the other 40 billion humans in the galaxy, together with every green plant or animal with hemoglobin in its blood." "That," said Jensen, and tried to smile, "sounds final." "It isn't," Nordenfeld told him. "If there's something in the universe which can kill every living thing except its maker, that something should be killed. There should be research going on about the chlorophage. It would be deadly dangerous work, but it should be done. A quarantine won't stop contagion, it can only hinder it. That's useful, but not enough." Jensen moistened his lips. Nordenfeld said abruptly, "I've answered your questions. Now what's on your mind, and what is it to do with chlorophage?" Jensen started. He went very pale. "It's too late to do anything about it," said Nordenfeld. "It's probably nonsense anyhow, but what is it?" Jensen stammered out his story. It explained why there were so many passengers for the Star Queen. It even explained his departure from Altera. But it was only a rumor, the kind of rumor that starts up untraceably and can never be verified. This one was officially denied by the Alteran planetary government, but it was widely believed by the sort of people who usually were well informed. Those who could sent their families up to the Star Queen, and that was why Jensen had been tense and worried until the liner had actually left Altera behind. Then he felt safe. Nordenfeld's jaw set as Jensen told his tale. He made no comment, but when Jensen was through, he nodded and went away, leaving his drink unfinished. Jensen couldn't see his face. It was hard as granite. And Nordenfeld, the ship's doctor of the Star Queen, went into the nearest bathroom and was violently sick. It was a reaction to what he had just learned. There were stars which were so far away that their distance didn't mean anything. There were planets beyond counting in a single star cluster, let alone the galaxy. There were comets and gas clouds in space, and worlds where there was life, and other worlds where life was impossible. The quantity of matter which was associated with life was infinitesimal, and the quantity associated with consciousness, animal life, was so much less that the difference couldn't be expressed. But the amount of animal life which could reason was so minute by comparison that the nearest ratio would be that of a single atom to a sun. Mankind, in fact, was the least impressive fraction of the smallest category of substance in the galaxy. Men did curious things. There was the cutting off of the Star Queen's short-distance drive before she'd gotten well away from Altera. There had been a lift ship locked to the liner's passenger airlock. When the last passenger entered the big ship, a little girl, the airlocks disconnected and the lift ship pulled swiftly away. It was not quite 2 miles from the Star Queen when its emergency airlocks opened and space-suited figures plunged out of it to emptiness. Simultaneously, the ports of the lift ship glowed, and almost immediately the whole plating turned cherry red, crimson, and then orange from unlimited heat developed within it. The lift ship went incandescent and ruptured, and there was a spout of white-hot air, and then it turned blue-white and puffed itself into nothing in metallic steam. Where it had been, there was only shining gas, which cooled. Beyond it, there were figures in spacesuits which tried to swim away from it. The Star Queen's control room obviously saw the happening. The lift ship's atomic pile had flared out of control and melted down the ship. It had developed something like 60,000 degrees Fahrenheit when it ceased to flare. It did not blow up, it only vaporized, but the process must have begun within seconds after the lift ship broke contact with the Star Queen. In automatic reaction, the man in control of the liner cut her drive and offered to turn back and pick up the space-suited figures in emptiness. The offer was declined with almost hysterical haste. In fact, it was barely made before the other lift ships moved in on rescue missions. They had waited, and they were picking up castaways before the Star Queen resumed its merely interplanetary drive and the process of aiming for a solar system some 30 light-years away. When the liner flicked into overdrive, more than half the floating figures had been recovered, which was remarkable. It was almost as remarkable as the flare-up of the lift ship's atomic pile. One has to know exactly what to do to make a properly designed atomic pile vaporize metal. Somebody had known, somebody had done it, and the other lift ships were waiting to pick up the destroyed lift ship's crew when it happened. The matter of the lift ship's destruction was fresh in Nordenfeld's mind when Jensen had told his story. The two items fitted together with an appalling completeness. They left little doubt or hope. Nordenfeld consulted the passenger records, and presently was engaged in conversation with the sober-faced, composed little girl on a sofa in one of the cabin levels of the Star Queen. "You're Kathy Brand, I believe," he said matter-of-factly. "I understand you've been having a rather bad time of it." She seemed to consider. "It hasn't been too bad," she assured him. "At least I've been seeing new things. I got dreadfully tired of seeing the same things all the time." "What things?" asked Nordenfeld. His expression was not stern now, though his inner sensations were not pleasant. He needed to talk to this child. He had learned how to talk to children. The secret is to talk exactly as to an adult, with respect and interest. "There weren't any windows," she explained, "and my father couldn't play with me, and all the toys and books were ruined by the water. It was dreadfully tedious. There weren't any other children, you see, and presently there weren't any grown-ups but my father." Nordenfeld only looked more interested. He'd been almost sure, ever since knowing of the lift ship's destruction and listening to Jensen's account of the rumor the government of Altera denied. He was horribly sure now. "How long were you in the place that hadn't any windows?" "Oh, dreadfully long," she said. "Since I was only 6 years old, almost half my life." She smiled brightly at him. "I remember looking out of windows and even playing out of doors, but my father and mother said I had to live in this place. My father talked to me often and often. He was very nice, but he had to wear that funny suit and keep the glass over his face because he didn't live in the room. The glass was because he went under the water, you know." Nordenfeld asked carefully, conversational-sounding questions. Kathy Brand, now aged 10, had been taken by her father to live in a big room without any windows. It hadn't any doors, either. There were plants in it, and there were bluish lights to shine on the plants, and there was a place in one corner where there was water. When her father came in to talk to her, he came up out of the water wearing the funny suit with glass over his face. He went out the same way. There was a place in the wall where she could look out into another room, and at first her mother used to come and smile at her through the glass, and she talked into something she held in her hand, and her voice came inside. But later she stopped coming. There was only one possible kind of place which would answer Kathy's description. When she was 6 years old, she had been put into some university's aseptic environment room, and she had stayed there. Such rooms were designed for biological research. They were built and then made sterile of all bacterial life, and afterward entered through a tank of antiseptic. Anyone who entered wore a suit which was made germ-free by its passage through the antiseptic, and he did not breathe the air of the aseptic room, but air which was supplied him through a hose, the exhaled air hose also passing under the antiseptic outside. No germ or microbe or virus could possibly get into such a room without being bathed in corrosive fluid which would kill it. So long as there was someone alive outside to take care of her, a little girl could live there and defy even chlorophage. And Kathy Brand had done it. But, on the other hand, Cameron was the only planet where it would be necessary, and it was the only world from which a father would land his small daughter on another planet's spaceport. There was no doubt. Nordenfeld grimly imagined someone, he would have had to be a microbiologist even to attempt it, fighting to survive and defeat the chlorophage while he kept his little girl in an aseptic environment room. She explained quite pleasantly as Nordenfeld asked more questions. There had been other people besides her father, but for a long time there had only been him, and Nordenfeld computed that somehow she had been kept alive on the dead planet Cameron for 4 long years. Recently, though, very recently, her father told her that they were leaving. Wearing his funny antiseptic-wetted suit, he'd enclosed her in a plastic bag with a tank attached to it. Air flowed from the tank into the bag and out through a hose that was all wetted inside. She breathed quite comfortably. It made sense. An air tank could be heated and its contents sterilized to supply germ-free or virus-free air. And Kathy's father took an axe and chopped away a wall of the room. He picked her up, still inside the plastic bag, and carried her out. There was nobody about. There was no grass. There were no trees. Nothing moved. Here Kathy's account was vague, but Nordenfeld could guess at the strangeness of a dead planet to the child who barely remembered anything but the walls of an aseptic environment room. Her father carried her to a little ship, said Kathy, and they talked a lot after the ship took off. He told her that he was taking her to a place where she could run about the outdoors and play, but he had to go somewhere else. He did mysterious things which to Nordenfeld meant a most scrupulous decontamination of a small spaceship's interior and its airlock. Its outer surface would reach a temperature at which no organic material could remain uncooked. And finally, said Kathy, her father had opened a door and told her to step out and goodbye. And she did, and the ship went away, her father still wearing his funny suit, and people came and asked her questions she did not understand. Kathy's narrative fitted perfectly into the rumor Jensen said circulated among the usually well-informed people on Altera. They believed, said Jensen, that a small spaceship had appeared in the sky above Altera's spaceport. It ignored all calls, landed swiftly, opened an airlock and let someone out, and plunged for the sky again. And the story said that radar telescopes immediately searched for and found the ship in space. They trailed it, calling vainly for it to identify itself, while it drove at top speed for Altera's sun. It reached the sun and dived in. Nordenfeld reached the skipper on intercom vision phone. Jensen had been called there to repeat his tale to the skipper. "I've talked to the child," said Nordenfeld grimly, "and I'm putting her into isolation quarters in the hospital compartment. She's from Cameron. She was kept in an aseptic environment room at some university or other. She says her father looked after her. I get an impression of a last-ditch fight by microbiologists against the chlorophage. They lost it. Apparently her father landed her on Altera and dived into the sun. From her story, he took every possible precaution to keep her from contagion or carrying contagion with her to Altera. Maybe he succeeded. There's no way to tell yet." The skipper listened in silence. Jensen said thinly, "Then the story about the landing was true." "Yes, the authorities isolated her and shipped her off on the Star Queen. Your well-informed friends, Jensen, didn't know what their government was going to do." Nordenfeld paused and said more coldly still, "They didn't handle it right. They should have killed her, painlessly, but at once. Her body should have been immersed with everything that she had touched in full-strength nitric acid. The same acid should have saturated the place where the ship landed and every place she walked. Every room she entered, and every hall she passed through should have been doused with nitric acid and then burned. It would still not have been all one could wish. The air she breathed couldn't be recaptured and heated white hot, but the chances for Altera's population to go on living would be improved. Instead, they isolated her, and they shipped her off with us, and thought they were accomplishing something by destroying the lift ship that had her in an airtight compartment until she walked into the Star Queen's lock. The skipper said heavily, "Do you think she brought chlorophage on board?" "I've no idea," said Nordenfeld. "If she did, it's too late to do anything but drive the Star Queen into the nearest sun. No. Before that, one should give warning that she was aground on Altera. No ship should land there. No ship should take off. Altera should be blocked off from the rest of the galaxy like Cameron was, and to the same end result." Jensen said unsteadily, "There'll be trouble if this is known on the ship. There'll be some unwilling to sacrifice themselves." "Sacrifice?" said Nordenfeld. "They're dead. But before they lie down, they can keep everybody they care about from dying too. Would you want to land and have your wife and family die of it?" The skipper said in the same heavy voice, "What are the probabilities? You say there was an effort to keep her from contagion. What are the odds?" "Bad," said Nordenfeld. "The man tried, for the child's sake, but I doubt he managed to make a completely aseptic transfer from the room she lived in to the spaceport on Altera. The authorities on Altera should have known it. They should have killed her and destroyed everything she'd touched, and still the odds would have been bad." Jensen said, "But you can't do that, Nordenfeld, not now." "I shall take every measure that seems likely to be useful." Then Nordenfeld snapped, "Damnation, man! Do you realize that this chlorophage can wipe out the human race if it really gets loose? Do you think I'll let sentiment keep me from doing what has to be done?" He flicked off the vision phone. The Star Queen came out of overdrive. Her skipper arranged it to be done at the time when the largest possible number of her passengers and crew would be asleep. Those who were awake, of course, felt the peculiar inaudible sensation which one subjectively translated into sound. They felt the momentary giddiness which, having no natural parallel, feels like the sensation of treading on a stair-step that isn't there, combined with a twisting sensation, so it's like a spiral fall. The passengers who were awake were mostly in the bars, and the bartenders explained that the ship had shifted overdrive generators and there was nothing to it. Those who were asleep started awake, but there was nothing in their surroundings to cause alarm. Some blinked in the darkness of their cabins and perhaps turned on the cabin lights, but everything seemed normal. They turned off the lights again. Some babies cried and had to be soothed, but there was nothing except wakening to alarm anybody. Babies went back to sleep, and mothers returned to their beds, and such awakenings being customary, went back to sleep also. It was natural enough. There were vague and commonplace noises, together making an indefinite hum. Fans circulated the ship's purified and reinvigorated air. Service motors turned in remote parts of the hull. Cooks and bakers moved about in the kitchens. Nobody could tell by any physical sensation that the Star Queen was not in overdrive except in the control room. There the stars could be seen. They were unthinkably remote. The ship was light years from any place where humans lived. She did not drive. Her skipper had a family on Cassim. He would not land a plague ship which might destroy them. The executive officer had a small son. If his return meant that small son's death as well as his own, he would not return. All through the ship, the officers who had to know the situation recognized that if chlorophage had gotten into the Star Queen, the ship must not land anywhere. Nobody could survive. Nobody must attempt it. So the huge liner hung in the emptiness between stars, waiting until it could be known definitely that chlorophage was aboard, or that with absolute certainty it was absent. The question was up to Dr. Nordenfeld. He had isolated himself with Kathy in the ship's hospital compartment. Since the ship was built, it had been used once by a grown man who developed mumps, and once by an adolescent boy who developed a raging fever which antibiotics stopped. Health measures for space travel were strict. The hospital compartment had only been used those 2 times. On this voyage, it had been used to contain an assortment of botanical specimens from a planet 70 light-years beyond Regulus. They were on their way to the Botanical Research Laboratory on Cassim. As a routine precaution, they had been placed in the hospital, which could be fumigated when they were taken out. Now the doctor had piled them in on one side of the compartment, which he had divided in half with a transparent plastic sheet. He stayed in that side. Kathy occupied the other. She had some flowering plants to look at and admire. They'd come from the air room, and she was delighted with their coloring and beauty. but Dr. Nordenfeld had put them there as a continuing test for chlorophage. If Kathy carried that murderous virus on her person, the flowering plants would die of it, probably even before she did. It was a scrupulously scientific test for the deadly stuff. Completely sealed off, except for a circulator to freshen the air she breathed, Kathy was settled with toys and picture books. It was an improvised but well-designed germ-proof room. The air for Kathy to breathe was sterilized before it reached her. The air she had breathed was sterilized as it left her plastic-sided residence. It should be the perfection of protection for the ship, if it was not already too late. The vision phone buzzed. Dr. Nordenfeld stirred in his chair and flipped the switch. The Star Queen's skipper looked at him out of the screen. "I've cut the overdrive," said the skipper. "The passengers haven't been told." "Very sensible," said the doctor. "When will we know?" "That we can go on living when the other possibility is exhausted." "Then how will we know?" asked the skipper stonily. Dr. Nordenfeld ticked off the possibilities. He bent down a finger. 1. Her father took great pains. Maybe he did manage an aseptic transfer from a germ-free room to Altera. Kathy may not have been exposed to the chlorophage. If she hasn't, no bleached spots will show up on the air room foliage, or among the flowering plants in the room with her. No one in the crew or among the passengers will die. He bent down a second finger. It's probably more likely that white spots will appear in the plant, in the air room, and here, and people will start to die. That will mean Kathy brought contagion here the instant she arrived, and almost certainly that Altera will become like Cameroon, uninhabited. In such a case, we're finished. He bent down a third finger. Not so likely, but preferable. White spots may appear on the foliage inside the plastic with Kathy, but not in the ship's air room. In that case, she was exposed, but the virus was incubating when she came on board, and only developed and spread after she was isolated. Possibly, in such a case, we can save the passengers and crew, but the ship will probably have to be melted down in space. It would be tricky, but it might be done. The skipper hesitated. If that last happened, I will take whatever measures are necessary, said Dr. Nordenfeld. To save your conscience, we won't discuss them. They should have been taken on Altera. He reached over and flipped off the phone. Then he looked up and into the other part of the ship's hospital space. Kathy came out from behind a screen, where she'd made ready for bed. She was beaming. She had a large picture book under one arm and a doll under the other. "It's all right for me to have these with me, isn't it, Dr. Nordenfeld?" she asked hopefully. "I didn't have any picture books but one, and it got worn out. And my doll, it was dreadful how shabby it was." The doctor frowned. She smiled at him. He said, "After all, picture books are made to be looked at and dolls to be played with." She skipped to the tiny hospital bed on the far side of the presumably virus-proof partition. She climbed into it and zestfully arranged the doll to share it. She placed the book within easy reach. She said, "I think my father would say you were very nice, Dr. Nordenfeld, to look after me so well." "No," said the doctor in a detached voice, "I'm just doing what anybody ought to do." She snuggled down under the covers. He looked at his watch and shrugged. It was very easy to confuse official night with official day in space. Everybody else was asleep. He'd been putting Kathy through tests, which began with measurements of pulse and respiration and temperature, and went on from there. Kathy managed them herself under his direction. He settled down with one of the medical books he'd brought into the isolation section with him. Its title was Decontamination of Infectious Material from Different Planets. He read it grimly. The time came when the Star Queen should have come out of overdrive with the sun's Circe blazing fiercely nearby, and a green planet with ice caps to be approached on interplanetary drive. There should have been droning, comforting drive noises to assure the passengers, who naturally could not see beyond the ship's steel walls, that they were within a mere few million miles of a world where sunshine was normal, and skies were higher than ship's ceilings, and there were fascinating things to see and do. Some of the passengers packed their luggage and put it outside their cabins to be picked up for landing. But no stewards came for it. Presently there was an explanation. The ship had run under maximum speed, and the planetfall would be delayed. The passengers were disappointed, but not concerned. The luggage vanished into cabins again. The Star Queen floated in space among 1,000 million stars. Her astrogators had computed a course to the nearest star into which to drive the Star Queen, but it would not be used unless there was mutiny among the crew. It would be better to go into remote orbit around Circe 3 and give the news of chlorophage on Altera if Dr. Nordenfeld reported it on the ship. Time passed. 1 day, 2, 3. Then Jensen called the hospital compartment on vision phone. His expression was dazed. Nordenfeld saw the interior of the control room behind Jensen. He said, "You're a passenger, Jensen. How is it you're in the control room?" Jensen moistened his lips. "The skipper thought I'd better not associate with the other passengers. I've stayed with the officers the past few days. We, the ones who know what's in prospect, we're keeping separate from the others, so nobody will let anything out by accident." "Very wise. When the skipper comes back on duty, ask him to call me. I've something interesting to tell him." "He's checking something now," said Jensen. His voice was thin and reedy. "The air officer reports there are white patches on the plants in the air room. They're growing fast. He told me to tell you. He's gone to make sure." "No need," said Nordenfeld bitterly. He swung the vision screen. It faced that part of the hospital space beyond the plastic sheeting. There were potted flowering plants there. They had pleased Kathy. They shared her air, and there were white patches on their leaves. "I thought," said Nordenfeld with an odd, mirthless levity, "that Skipper'd be interested. It is of no importance whatever now, but I accomplished something remarkable. Kathy's father didn't manage an aseptic transfer. She brought the chlorophage with her, but I can find it. The plants on the far side of that plastic sheet show the chlorophage patches plainly. I expect Kathy to show signs of anemia shortly. I decided that drastic measures would have to be taken, and it looked like they might work because I've confined the virus. It's there where Kathy is, but it isn't where I am. All the botanical specimens on my side of the sheet are untouched. The phage hasn't hit them. It is remarkable, but it doesn't matter a damn if the air room's infected. And I was so proud." Jensen did not respond. Nordenfeld said ironically, "Look what I accomplished. I protected the air plants on my side. See, they're beautifully green, no sign of infection. It means that a man can work with chlorophage. A laboratory ship could land on Cameron and keep itself the equivalent of an aseptic environment room while the damned chlorophage was investigated and ultimately whipped, and it doesn't matter." Jensen said numbly, "We can't ever make port. We ought to. We'll take the necessary measures," Nordenfeld told him. Very quietly and very efficiently, with neither the crew nor the passengers knowing that Altera sent the chlorophage on board the Star Queen in the hope of banishing it from there. The passengers won't know that their own officials shipped it off with them as they tried to run away. And I was so proud that I'd improvised an aseptic room to keep Kathy in. I sterilized the air that went into her, and I sterilized... Then he stopped. He stopped quite short. He stared at the air unit, set up with 2 pipes passing through the plastic partition which cut the hospital space in 2. He turned utterly white. He went roughly to the air machine. He jerked back its cover. He put his hand inside. Minutes later, he faced back to the vision screen from which Jensen looked apathetically at him. "Tell the skipper to call me," he said in a savage tone. "Tell him to call me instantly he comes back, before he issues any orders at all." He bent over the sterilizing equipment and very carefully began to disassemble it. He had it completely apart when Kathy waked. She peered at him through the plastic separation sheet. "Good morning, Dr. Nordenfeld," she said cheerfully. The doctor grunted. Kathy smiled at him. She had gotten on very good terms with the doctor since she had been kept in the ship's hospital. She did not feel that she was isolated. In having the doctor where she could talk to him at any time, she had much more company than ever before. She had read her entire picture book to him and discussed her doll at length. She took it for granted that when he did not answer or frown that he was simply busy, but he was company because she could see him. Dr. Nordenfeld put the air apparatus together with an extremely peculiar expression on his face. It had been built for Kathy's special isolation by a ship's mechanic. It should sterilize the used air going into Kathy's part of the compartment, and it should sterilize the used air pushed out by the supplied fresh air. The hospital itself was an independent sealed unit with its own chemical air freshener, and it had been divided into 2. The air freshener was where Dr. Nordenfeld could attend to it, and the sterilizer pump simply shared the freshening air with Kathy, but the pipe that pumped air to Kathy was brown and discolored from having been used for sterilizing, and the pipe that brought air back was not. It was cold. It had never been heated. So Dr. Nordenfeld had been exposed to any contagion Kathy could spread. He hadn't been protected at all. Yet the potted plants on Kathy's side of the barrier were marked with great white splotches which grew almost as one looked. while the botanical specimens in the doctor's part of the hospital, as much infected as Kathy's could have been, by failure of the ship's mechanic to build the sterilizer to work two ways. The stacked plants, the alien plants, the strange plants from 70 light-years beyond Regulus, they were vividly green. There was no trace of chlorophagy on them, yet they had been as thoroughly exposed as Dr. Nordenfeld himself. The doctor's hands shook. His eyes burned. He took out a surgeon's scalpel and ripped the plastic partition from floor to ceiling. Kathy watched interestedly. "Why did you do that, Dr. Nordenfeld?" she asked. He said in an emotionless, unnatural voice, "I'm going to do something that it was very stupid of me not to do before. It should have been done when you were 6 years old, Kathy. It should have been done on Cameron, and after that on Altera. Now we're going to do it here. You can help me." The Star Queen had floated out of overdrive long enough to throw all distance computations off, but she swung about and swam back, and presently she was not too far from the world where she was now many days overdue. Lift ships started up from the planet's surface, but the Star Queen ordered them back. "Get your spaceport health officer on the vision phone," ordered the Star Queen's skipper. "We've had chlorophagy on board." There was panic. Even at a distance of 100,000 miles, chlorophagy could strike stark terror into anybody. But presently the image of the spaceport health officer appeared on the Star Queen's screen. "We're not landing," said Dr. Nordenfeld. "There's almost certainly an outbreak of chlorophagy on Altera, and we're going back to do something about it. It got our ship with passengers from there. We've whipped it, but we may need some help." The image of the health officer aground was a mask of horror for seconds after Nordenfeld's last statement. Then his expression became incredulous, though still horrified. "We came on to here," said Dr. Nordenfeld, "to get you to send word by the first other ship to the patrol that a quarantine has to be set up on Altera, and that we need to be inspected for recovery from chlorophagy infection. And we need to pass on, officially, the discovery that whipped the contagion on this ship. We were carrying botanical specimens to Cassim, and we discovered that they were immune to chlorophagy. That's absurd, of course. Their green coloring is the same substance as in plants under Sol-type suns anywhere. They couldn't be immune to chlorophagy, so there had to be something else." Was there?" asked the health officer. "There was. Those specimens came from somewhere beyond Regulus. They carried, as normal symbiotes on their foliage, microorganisms unknown both on Cameron and Altera. The alien bugs are almost the size of virus particles, feed on virus particles, and are carried by contact, air, and so on, as readily as virus particles themselves. We discovered that those microorganisms devoured chlorophagy. We washed them off the leaves of the plants, sprayed them in our air room jungle, and they multiplied faster than the chlorophagy. Our whole air supply is now loaded with an airborne anti-chlorophagy organism which has made our crew and passengers immune. We're heading back to Altera to turn loose our merry little bugs on that planet. It appears that they grow on certain vegetation, but they'll live anywhere there's phage to eat. We're keeping some chlorophagy cultures alive so our microorganisms don't die out for lack of food." The medical officer on the ground gasped. "Keeping phage alive?" "I hope you've recorded this," said Nordenfeld. "It's rather important. This trick should have been tried on Cameron and Altera and everywhere else new diseases have turned up. When there's a bug on one planet that's deadly to us, there's bound to be a bug on some other planet that's deadly to it. The same goes for any pests or vermin. The principle of natural enemies. All we have to do is find the enemies." There was more communication between the Star Queen and the spaceport on Circe 3, which the Star Queen would not make other contact with on this trip, and presently the big liner headed back to Altera. It was necessary for official as well as humanitarian reasons. There would need to be a health examination of the Star Queen to certify that it was safe for passengers to breathe her air and eat in her restaurants and swim in her swimming pools, and occupy the 6 levels of passenger cabins she contained.
This would have to be done by a patrol ship, which would turn up at Altera. The Star Queen's skipper would be praised by his owners for not having driven the liner into a star, and the purser would be forgiven for the confusion in his records due to off-schedule operations of the big ship. And Jensen would find in the ending of all terror of chlorophagy an excellent reason to look for appreciation in the value of the investments he was checking up.
And Dr. Nordenfeld? He talked very gravely to Kathy. "I'm afraid," he told her, "that your father isn't coming back. What would you like to do?" She smiled at him hopefully. "Could I be your little girl?" she asked. Dr. Nordenfeld grunted. I'll think about it." but he smiled at her. She grinned at him, and it was settled. End of Doctor by Murray Leinster. Recording by David Loving, www.davidaloving.com.
Dumbwaiter by James Dammers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Perard. Dumbwaiter by James Dammers. Antimony 9 divers can't be seen, of course, but don't have anything in mind when one of them is around you. The man ahead of me had a dragon in his baggage, so the Lemovic boys confiscated it. Lemovic, livestock, animal, mineral, and vegetable, international customs, does not like to find dragons curled up in a thermos. And since this antipathy was a two-way exchange, the Lemovic inspectors of Philadelphia International were singed and heated all ways by the time they got to me. I knew them well. Mr. Saul Jones? That's right, I said, watching the would-be dragon smuggler being marched away. A very amateur job. I could have told them there are only two ways to smuggle a dragon nowadays. Any livestock to declare, Mr. Jones? I have no livestock on my person or in my baggage, nor am I accompanied by any material prohibited article, I said carefully, for I saw they were recording. The little pink bald inspector with a charred collar looked at his colleague. Anything known? His colleague looked down at me from 6 feet of splendid physique, smiled unpleasantly, and flipped the big black record book. Saul Jones, he read, Lemovic 4-star offender, galactic registration 6 to 10th power, 763918, 5 foot 10 inches, earth scale, blue eyes, hair variable and usually nondescript brown, earlobes and cranial. You're not disputing identity, Mr. Jones? Oh no, that's me. I see. Irrevocable galactic citizenship for services to family of Supreme President Exgol in matter of asteroid fungus. Subsequent senatorial amnesty confirmed. Previous sentences therefore omitted. Lemovic offenses thereafter include no indictable evidence but total 24 minor fines for introducing prohibited livestock onto various planets. Suspected complicity in Lemovic cases 1 through 76 as follows. Mobile sands, crystal thinkers, recording turtle, operatic fish, giant mastodon. Mr. Jones, you seem to have given us trouble before. Before what? Before this, that, I said, is an unconstitutional remark. I am giving no trouble. I have made a full declaration. I demand the rights of a galactic citizen. He apologized, as he had to. This merely made both inspectors angry, but they were going to search me anyway. I knew that. Certainly, I am a smuggler, and I had, in fact, a little present for my girl Florence. A wedding present, I hoped, but they would never find it. This time I really had them fooled, and I intended to extract maximum pleasure from watching their labors. I saw the Lemovic records once. The next leading offender has only 2 stars, and he's out on Ceres in the penal colony. My 4 stars denote that I disapprove of all these rules prohibiting the carrying of livestock from one planet to another. Other people extend the galactic empire. I extend my galactic credit. You want an amusing extraterrestrial pet to while away the 2-hour work week? I can provide one. Of course, This pet business was overdone in the early days when any space hopper could bring little foreign monsters back to the wife and kiddies. Any weird thing could come in, and did. You are aware, Mr. Jones, that you have declared that you are not trying to bring in any prohibited life form, whether animal, mineral, vegetable, or any or all of these? I am, I said. You are further aware of the penalties for a false declaration? In my case, I believe I could count on 30 years invigorating work on a penal planet. You could, Mr. Jones. You certainly could. Well, I've made my declaration. Will you step this way? Very polite in Philadelphia spaceport, I followed the inspectors into the screening cubicles. There was a nasty-looking device in the corner. I thought those things were illegal, I said. Unfortunately, Mr. Jones, you are, as you know, quite right. We may not employ a telepath instrument on any unconvicted person. They looked sorry, but I wasn't. A telepath would have told them immediately where I had Florence's pet and all about it. I smiled at them. They paid no attention, took my passport, and began turning up the Lamavic manual on Antimony 9, livestock of prohibited forms. I had just come from there, and so had Florence's little diver, which I had brought as a happy surprise. I sat down. The two inspectors looked as if they were going to say something, then continued flipping pages of their manual. Here it is, Antimony 9. One of them read out the prohibitions, and the other tried to watch me and the reflex counter behind me at the same time. A crude instrument which should be used, in my professional view, only to determine a person's capacities for playing poker with success. Ants, water, babblers, bunces, candelabra plants, catchin' fellers, Scythia majoris, divers, dunces, dimple images, drakes, dunking dogs, dogs, salvage, dogs, water, dogs not otherwise provided for, unspecified, elephants, miniature, fish, any. They went on. Antimony 9 is teeming with life, and almost every specimen is prohibited on other planets. We had passed the divers, anyway. I smiled and gave the reflex counter a strong jerk, just as the smaller inspector was saying, mammoths. They looked at me in silence. Funny man, one said, and they went on reading. Okay, the large inspector said at last. We'll examine him for everything. For the next 3 hours they took blood specimens to see if I had microscopic livestock hidden there, then x-rayed me and my baggage, fluoroscoped everything again, put the baggage through an irritator life indexer, investigated my orifices in detail with a variety of instruments, took skin scrapings in case I was wearing a false layer, and the only thing they found was my dark glasses. Why don't you wear modern contact lenses? It's none of your business, I said, but these old-style spectacles have liquid lenses. There was a flurry, and they sent away for analysis a small drop from one of the lenses. There were no signs of prohibited life in the liquid. I could have told you that, I said. It's dicyanin, a vegetable extract. Diminishes the glare. I put the glasses on my nose and hooked on the earpieces. The effect was medieval, but I could see the little diver now. I could also see disturbing evidence of the inspector's mental condition. A useful little device invented by Dr. W. J. Kilner, 1847 to 1920, for the study of the human aura in sickness and health. After a little practice, which I was not going to allow the Lamavic inspectors, the retina became sufficiently sensitive to see the microwave aura when you looked through the dicyanin screen. As was true of most of these PSI pioneers at that time, nothing was done to further Kilmer's work when he died. I noticed, without surprise, that the inspectors had a mental field of very limited extent, and that the little diver had survived the journey nicely. "Can I go now?" I asked. "This time, Mr. Jones." When I left, the repair staff was building a new inspection barrier to replace the parts the Dragon had got. Such an amateur performance. Leave smuggling to professionals, and we'd have Lamovic disbanded from boredom in 10 years. I nearly slipped on the fine silica dioxide which had fused in the air when the Dragon got annoyed. Nasty, dangerous pets. The one for Florence was the only contraband I was carrying this trip, which was purely pleasure. She was waiting for me in her apartment, tall, golden, luscious, and all mine. She thought I was in import-export, which in a sense was true. "I've missed you so much, Saul," she said, twining herself on me and the couch like a Venusian water-nymph. "Did you bring me a present?" I lay back and let her kiss me. Of course I did. A small but very valuable present. I let her kiss me again. "Not a Jupiter diamond, Saul?" "Much rarer than that, and more useful." "Oh, useful. Something to help you in the house when we're married, honey. Now, don't pout so prettily, or I'll never get around to showing you." My homecoming was not developing quite as I planned, but I put this down to womanly, if not exactly maidenly, quirks. When she found out what I had brought her, I was sure she would be all over me again. I put on my dark glasses so that I could see where the diver was. "Would you like a drink, honey?" I asked. "I don't mind," she said sulkily. I looked at the diver, concentrated hard on the thought of a bottle from the cabinet, 2 glasses, and a pitcher of ice from the kitchen. He went revolving through the air obediently, and the items came floating out neatly. Florence nearly shattered the windows with her screams. "Now, calm down, honey," I said, catching her. "Calm down. It's just the little present I brought you." The bottle, glasses, and pitcher dropped gently onto the table beside us. "See," I said, "service at a thought, remote control, the end of housework. Kiss me." She didn't. "You mean you did that, Saul?" "Not me exactly. I've brought you a little baby diver, honey, all the way from Antimony 9, just for you. There isn't another one on Earth. In fact, I doubt if there's another one outside Antimony 9. I had a lot of trouble securing this rare and valuable present for you." "I don't like it. It gives me the creeps." "Honey," I said carefully, "this is a little baby. It couldn't hurt a mouse. It's about 6 inches in diameter, and all it is doing is to teleport what you want it to teleport." "Then why can't I see it?" "If you could see it, I wouldn't have been allowed to bring it for you, honey, because a whole row of nasty-minded solar civil servants would have seen it too, and they would have taken it from your own sweet Saul." "They can have it." "Honey, this is a rare and valuable pet. It will do things for you." "So you think I need something done for me? Well, I'm glad you came right out and said this before we were married." The following series of but from me and irrelevance from Florence occupied an hour, but hardly mentioned the diver. Eventually, I got her back into my arms. My urges for Florence were strictly biological, though intense. There were little chances for intellectual exchanges between us, but I was more interested in the probabilities of her as a woman. I could go commune with wild and exotic intelligences on foreign planets any time I had the fare. As a woman, Florence was what I wanted. Back on Antimony 9, I explained carefully, life is fierce and rugged. So, to keep from being eaten, these little divers evolve themselves into little minds with no bodies at all, and they feed off solar radiation. Now, honey, minds are not made of the same stuff brains are made of, good solid tissue and gray matter and neural cortex. Don't be dirty, Saul. There is nothing dirty about the body, honey. Minds are invisible, but detectable in the microwavelengths of any sensitive counter, and look like little glass eggs when you can see them, as I can by using these glasses. In fact, your diver is over by the window now, but having evolved this far, they came across a little difficulty and couldn't evolve any further. So there they are, handy little minds for teleporting whatever you want moved and reading other people's thoughts. She gasped. Did you say reading other people's thoughts? Certainly, I said. As a matter of fact, that's what stopped the divers from evolving further. If they brush against any thinking creature, they pick up whatever thought is in the creature's conscious mind, but they also pick up the subliminal activity, if you follow me. And down at that level of a mind, such as man's, his thoughts are not only the present unconscious thoughts, but also a good slice of what is, to him, still the future. It's one of those space-time differences. The divers are not really on the same space-time reference as the physical world, but that makes them all the more useful, because our minds aren't either. Did you say reading other people's thoughts, like a telepath? She persisted. Exactly like a telepath, or any other class of PSI. We're really living on a much wider scale than we're conscious of, but our mind only tracks down one point in time-space in a straight line, which happens to fit our bodies. Our subliminal mind is way out in every direction, including time, and when you pick up fragments of this consciously, you're a PSI. That's all. So the divers got thoroughly confused. That's what it amounts to, and never evolved any further. So you see, honey, it's all perfectly natural. I think you're just dirty. Eh? Everyone hates telepaths. You know that. I don't. Oh, you go wandering all over the galaxy. But my friends, what could I say to my friends if they learned I had something like a telepath in the apartment? It's only a baby diver, I keep telling you, honey. And anyway, you'll be able to tell what they're really thinking about you. Florence looked thoughtful. And what they've been doing? Sometimes they will do what they think they'll do, and sometimes they don't make it. But it's what their subliminal plans to have happen. Yes. She kissed me. I think it's a lovely present, Saul. She snuggled up to me, and I concentrated on bringing the diver over to her. I thought I'd read her, just for a joke, and see what she had in mind. I took a close look. What's the matter, Saul? Oh, honey, you beautiful creature. This is nice, but what made you say that? I just got the diver to show me your mind, and bits of the next 2 weeks you have in mind. It's going to be a lovely, lovely vacation. She blushed very violently and got angry. You had no right to look at what I was thinking, Saul. It wasn't what you were thinking so much as what you will be thinking, honey. I figure in it quite well. I won't have it, Saul. Do you hear me? I think spying on people is detestable. I thought you liked the idea of tagging your friends. That's different. Either we go somewhere without that whatever it is, or you can marry someone else. I don't mind having it around after we're married, but not before, Saul. Do you understand? I was already reaching for the video yellow pages. I turned on the television wall in the apartment before we left and instructed the diver to stay around and watch it. They are very curious creatures, inquisitive, always chasing new ideas, and I thought that should hold the diver happily for several days. Meanwhile, I had booked adjoining rooms at the Asteroid Central. The Asteroid Central advertised in the video yellow pages that it practiced the most rigid discrimination, meaning no telepaths, clairvoyants, clairaudience, or psychometrists. Life was hard on a PSI outside government circles, but life was much harder on the rest of the world seeking secluded privacy and discretion. The Asteroid Central was so discreet you could hardly see where you were going. Dim lights, elegant figures passing in the gloom, singing perfumes of the gentlest kind, and guaranteed PSI free on every bedroom door. I was humming idly in my room, with one eye on the communicating door, through which, were she but true to her own mind, Florence would shortly come, and I turned on the television wall only to see how less fortunate people were spending their leisure, an idle and most regrettable gesture. There was a quiz game on International Channel 462, dull and just finishing. All the contestants seemed to know all the answers. In fact, the man who won the trip around the rings of Saturn did so by answering the question before the Martian quizmaster had really finished reading it out. When the winner turned sharply on the other contestants and knocked them down, yelling, "So that's what you think of my mother, is it?" the wall was blacked out, and we were taken straight to the Solar Party convention. The nominee this decade was human. He seemed to be speaking on his aims, his pure record, and altruistic intentions. The stereo cameras looked over the heads of the delegates. Starting in the row by the main aisle, each delegate shot to his feet and started booing and jeering. It rippled down the rows like a falling pack of cards, each delegate in turn after the man in front of him, at each row picking up where the back of the previous row left off. It was as if someone were passing a galvanizing brush along the heads of the delegates, row by row, or as if a diver were refreshing the delegates with a clear picture of their nominee's mind. I groaned and called Florence. "Look," I said when she came, "that damned pet has followed the program back to the cameras from your apartment, and there he is, lousing up the convention." "I vote Earth," she told me indifferently. "That isn't the point, honey. I'll have to bring the diver here, and quickly. You do that, Saul. I'll be at home when you get rid of it." By the time the diver picked up my thoughts and came flickering into the room through the walls, Florence had left. I felt the diver off the back of my head, made my thoughts as kindly as possible, and went downstairs to the largest, longest bar. The evening passed profitably because I was invited to join a threesome of crooks at cards. With the aid of the little diver, I was able to shorten the odds to a pleasant margin in my favor. But this was doing nothing about Florence. A not altogether funny remark about teleporting the cards did, however, suggest the answer. After the transaction was over, I sent the diver off to a friend on the faculty of Luke University, where they had a long history of PSI investigation, and where the diver could be guaranteed to be kept busy rolling dice and such. This was easy to fix by a video call. There had been times in the past when certain services to the extraterrestrial zoology and botanical tanks had made me discreetly popular with the faculty, and anyway they thought I was doing them a favor. They promised to keep the little diver busy for an indefinite period. I reported to Florence, and after a certain amount of feminine shan't I, she came back to the asteroid central. This time I did not turn on the television wall. I lay still. I said nothing. I hardly thought at all, and after several years compressed themselves into every minute, my own true honey, Florence, slid open the communicating door and came into the room. She walked shyly toward me, hiding modestly within a floating nightgown as opaque as a very clear soap bubble. I stood up, held out my arms, and she came toward me, smiling, and stopped to pick up something on the carpet. "Ooh, Saul, look, a Jupiter diamond." She held up the largest and most expensive diamond I have ever seen. I was just going to claim credit for this little gift when another appeared, and another, and a long line marching over the carpet like an ant trail. They came floating in under the door. Now, love is for vacations, and between my own sweet Florence and a diamond mine, there is no comparison. I put on my dicyanid glasses and saw the baby diver was back and at work teleporting. I said so, but this time there were no hysterics from Florence. I was just thinking of him, she said, and wishing you had brought me a Jupiter diamond instead. Well, honey, it looks as if you got both. I watched her scrambling on the carpet, gathering handfuls of diamonds and not in the least interested in me. On Antimony 9, the little divers switched from one space-time point to another simultaneously, and the baby diver had come back from the solar party convention the same way. I thought of it, and it came. Florence had just thought of it, and here it was, but now it seemed to be flitting lightly from Earth to Jupiter and back with diamonds, so perhaps there was no interplanetary distance to a mind. This had a future. I could see myself with a winter and a summer planet of my own, even happily paying Earth, solar, and galactic taxes. Well, honey, don't you worry, I said. You don't like divers, so I'll take it back and give you something else. Just leave it to Saul. Take your foot off that diamond, Saul Jones. You gave me this dear little diver, and he's mine. She sat back on her heels and thought. The evidence of her thinking immediately came trickling through the door. Venusian opals set in a gold bracelet 1/2 pound heavy, Martian sleaze furs, spiderweb stockings, platinum belts. The room was beginning to look like a video fashion center, a galactic merchandise mart. And after Florence put on a coat and opened the door, her ideas began to get bigger. This is fun, she cried, teleporting like mad. Why, I can have anything in the galaxy just by thinking about it. No, honey, think of the benefits to humanity. This is too big to be used for personal gain. This is dedicated to me, Saul Jones, so just you keep your fingers off it. Why, the cute little thing. Look, he's been out to Saturn for me. I made a decision. Think wide and grand, Saul Jones, I said. Sacrifice yourself for the greater good. Florence, honey, you know I love you. Will you marry me? That stopped her. You mean it, Saul? Of course. It's not just because of this diver. Why, honey, how could you think such a thing? If I'd never brought it in for you, I'd still want to marry you. You never said so before, she said. But okay, if you do it now. Right now, Saul Jones. So the merchandise stopped coming in while we plugged into the video and participated in a moving and legal ceremony. The marriage service was expensive, but after all, we could teleport a few thousand credit blanks from the solar treasury. Immediately after we had switched off, we did so. Are you sure you married me? For myself, Saul? I swear it, honey. No other thought entered my head. Just you. I made a few notes while Florence planned the house we would have, furnished with rare materials from anywhere. I thought one of the medium asteroids would do for a base for Saul Jones' intergalactic transport. I could see it all. Vast warehouses and immediate delivery of anything from anywhere. I wondered if there was a limit to the diver's capacity. So Florence desired an encyclopedia, and in it came, floating through the doorway. It says, she read, not much is known about Antimony 9 divers because none have ever been known to leave their planet. They probably need the stimulus of an educated mind, I said. Anyway, this one can get diamonds from Jupiter, and so on, and that's what matters. I kissed the wife of the president of Saul Jones Intergalactic and was interrupted by discreet tapping on the door. The manager of the Asteroid Central beamed at us. Excuse, he said, but we understand you have just been married, Mr. and Mrs. Jones. Irrevocably, I said. Felicitations. The Asteroid Central will be sending up complimentary euphorics. There is just a small point, Mr. Jones. We notice you have a large selection of valuable gifts for the bride. He looked around the room and smiled at the piles of stuff Florence had thought of. Of course, he went on, we trust your stay will be pleasant, and perhaps you will let us know if you will be wanting anything else. I expect we will, but we'll let you know, I said. Thank you, Mr. Jones. It is merely that we noticed you had emptied every showcase on the ground floor, and a few moments ago teleported the credit contents of the bar up here. Not of importance, really. It is all charged on your bill. You saw it and didn't stop it? I yelled. Oh, no, Mr. Jones. We always make an exception for antimony 9 divers. Limited creatures, really, but good for our business. We get about 1 a month. Smuggled in, you know, but the upkeep proves too expensive. Some women do shop without more than a passing thought, don't they? I saw what he meant, but Mrs. Saul Jones took it very philosophically. Never mind, Saul, you have me. Or vice versa, honey, I said. End of Dumbwaiter by James Stamers.